This absolute madman was sprinting barefoot over a path of razor-sharp blades. He'd just kick his shoes aside and keep charging forward without missing a single stride. Even when his feet were shredded beyond feeling, they'd knit back together in a matter of heartbeats. This insane journey all kicked off on the day he turned 18, the moment Onijikyu stumbled upon the truth of his birth. He was the bearer of a legendary dual bloodline. He possessed the undying spark of immortality, fused with the primal instincts of a high-tier shapeshifter. The very morning after his birthday bash, he woke up realizing his body had undergone a terrifying transformation. Chiseled muscles exploded out of nowhere, and his raw power hit a god-tier level. That was the start of his hellish training regime, to forge himself into the ultimate undying weapon, free-falling off jagged cliffs, sprinting across carpets of steel blades, shattering limits in the Iron Sanctuary, and mastering every lethal tool to his very limit. Every drop of sweat was shed to tame the chaotic power of a perfect hybrid. Now, let's rewind the clock to where this crazy story actually began. Once upon a time, the world was a boring, normal place. People were just minding their business, crossing the streets like clockwork, until a sinister, swirling energy began to coil around someone's feet. The moment he looked down to see the source, the young man was struck with a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. His entire being was being dragged into a shadowy, mysterious vortex. That was the signal. The black holes were finally opening up. While that poor background extra was getting deleted, the crowd scrambled in a panic as something dark and ancient crawled out of the abyss. Twisted, bloodthirsty monstrosities emerged, ready to tear civilization apart. In no time, news choppers were swarming the skies, reporting that the rift was expanding by the second. As the clock kept ticking, the body count started skyrocketing. In the wreckage, a kid with a suspiciously large head is lying broken on the pavement. But right next to him stands a guy who actually looks like he's ready for war. This absolute unit stares the monsters down without even blinking. Welcome to a world where ordinary has been tossed out the window. Abyssal rifts tore through reality everywhere. In the clouds, beneath the waves, and right under our feet. These portals spat out nightmarish creatures that launched a genocidal campaign against humanity. But that's when the supernaturals stepped up, the awakened ones with the powers I mentioned earlier. The ones who can lose a limb, grow it back, and laugh at death are known as the immortals. Then you've got the ones who can shift into apex predators. Those are the shifters. And the mages? Well, they do exactly what you'd expect. Sling spells and bend reality. Thanks to these elite powerhouses, humanity clawed its way back, and that chaotic era was forever branded as the terrible year. With the fires put out, the public's gaze shifted to these supernaturals, as their raw power sent shivers down the spine of every normal person. The government eventually had to step in, creating a massive bureaucracy to keep these unique assets on a leash. Fueled by corporate greed and global conglomerates, powerful organizations began to dominate the scene. Much like psychics, mages preferred to stay in the shadows to avoid trouble, and 20 years later, they're still blending into the crowd, living secret lives among the mundane. While our boy is mindlessly scrolling through his feed at the grocery store, his old man drops a bomb, telling him to brace himself for some life-changing news. Without a hint of hesitation, the dad just blurts out, "Son, you're an immortal." The boy's brain hit a blue screen, only rebooting once they were already bagging the groceries. His dad claims it's a family heirloom, and the kid is left wondering why they're discussing destiny over a pack of ramen. The old man begs him to keep his mouth shut, especially when it comes to his mother. Immortals are known for their eternal youth and top-tier visuals. The dad admits his son didn't get the beauty genes, but the undying part is a lock. The awakening is scheduled for exactly 11 p.m. tonight. Flooded with info, the boy can't believe how casual his dad is being about the whole thing. Only then did the father, who looks way too young for his age, realize they forgot the garlic, and the boy remembers his mom's specific request for the easy peel ones. Once more, the dad pleads with him to keep his immortality under wraps around the wife. She has no clue she's been sharing a bed with a literal god for all these years. If the truth comes out, their marriage is going straight into the dumpster. But since they were holding up the line, the boy suggested they take the secret agent talk to the parking lot. As he hauls the heavy grocery bags, the dad watches with a glimmer in his eye, impressed that his son is carrying the whole load in a single trip. That's the kind of raw strength that makes a father puff his chest out. It's rare for an immortal to be a natural powerhouse. He figures the kid's gym habit must be paying off. Our MC gives a nervous laugh, knowing full well he's actually the king of the couch potatoes. This natural strength actually hints at a second, deeper secret the boy has been guarding. They finally pull up to the house, and they're greeted with a warm smile by the lady of the house. And that second secret? Our protagonist has been sitting on it long before he ever heard the word immortal. The parents look like the ultimate power couple, and the mom is hyped that they actually got the right garlic. Watching this cutesy, over-the-top affection is pure cringe for our poor protagonist. It's a house built on lies, a total ticking time bomb. You see, the mom is secretly a high-level shifter. She'd confessed her secret to him 2 years ago, and he was pretty sure he'd inherited that animalistic side of the family too. Shifter powers usually wake up at 18, and his countdown is set for tonight. Double the news for our overwhelmed MC. After dropping her truth bomb, the mom begged him never to tell his normal father. She made it clear that this secret was the only thing keeping the family together. Back in reality, the parents ask him what he wants for his big birthday gift. But the MC is a humble guy. He says having such a great family is gift enough. His parents joke that he'll regret being so selfless. The mom absolutely melts at his answer, saying he's a sweet talker just like his dad, while the old man credits the mom for his good character. There's so much love in the air, you'd almost forget they're both world-class liars. But for our hero, it's a win-win. He's the ultimate immortal shifter hybrid in the making. His birthday celebration follows the old-school, traditional vibes. And the boy is just sitting there, baffled that his parents are still playing this game of charades. Later, tucked away in his room, the boy tries to catch his breath and relax. Glancing at the clock, he sees the 11 p.m. deadline is closing in fast. He replays the talk with his dad, wondering if the transition into an immortal is a painful experience. His dad described it as a quick flash of heat followed by an icy chill. That was the moment his senses hit overdrive. It was weird but painless. This makes the MC remember the shifter talk. He nearly had a stroke when his mom claimed she was just a regular human. Our boy asks if he's a lock for immortality. The dad guarantees it, saying those genes are like a freight train. Nothing stops them. Just as he was about to spill some deeper details about his own past, the old man cut himself off, figuring it wasn't relevant to the kid. Which, of course, just dialed the protagonist's curiosity up to 11. Staring at the ceiling, the boy wonders if it's even possible to juggle both bloodlines at once. He's already a shifter at heart. What happens if the immortal side ghosts him tonight? Trying not to spiral into a panic, the boy decides to just close his eyes and hope for the best. But that night was destined to be anything but peaceful. Our boy is writhing in agony, flashes of the terrible year, before the world was infested with rifts, dancing in his mind. Back when nobody knew what an immortal or a shifter even was. Back when life was actually truly simple. Meanwhile, our MC is currently stuck in a personal hell. The sheer agony of his transformation is pushing him to the absolute brink. Suddenly, a chilling, supernatural glow ignited in his eyes, radiating an aura that was anything but human. Wait, let's jump back 2 years to when our boy first hit 18. Staring at his reflection, he was stunned to see his physique had become insanely shredded overnight. That's the gift of a shifter, pure, explosive muscle mass without even hitting the gym. His mom suddenly appeared, totally unfazed as she'd been expecting this. She gave him a smirk, asking if he was enjoying his new buff status. Our boy was dying of embarrassment, but the matriarch was just there to make sure his system hadn't crashed during the upgrade. The protagonist admitted he felt a terrifying surge of power, and his senses had sharpened to a razor's edge. But he was salty. He couldn't understand why she kept him in the dark until his body literally started evolving. He described the pain like having his scalp ripped off and his muscles shredded by 1,000 knives. The mom just shrugged, saying a heads up wouldn't have made the torture any easier. Pain is the entry fee for power, and he had to pay it in full. Freaked out, the boy asked if this awakening was a recurring nightmare, but she promised it was a one-time deal. Our hero let out a massive sigh of relief. Once was definitely enough for a lifetime of trauma. Fast forward back to the present, and the poor guy is currently fighting for his life again. If you're looking for comfort, you won't find it here. His body is basically a construction site for new powers. The next morning, The boy gave his face a few stretches to see if he was still human. Even with his newly minted immortality, he realized he wasn't immune to feeling the sting of pain. His looks hadn't changed much, but his eyes were different. He now had built-in night vision that could peer through the darkest shadows. His hearing had also reached a supernatural level. Every tiny sound felt like a gunshot, and the sensory overload was becoming a total nightmare to manage. He focused hard, trying to dial down the volume of the world just to keep his brain from exploding, until finally the static cleared and his senses leveled out. Breathing a sigh of relief, it finally sank in. He was officially an immortal. But now the real game begins. Can he keep these god-tier abilities a secret from the world? From the kitchen, they're calling for Onajikyu to come eat. Seriously, that name is a total disaster for a main character. When he walked into the dining room, our boy's jaw hit the floor. The breakfast spread was so massive it looked like a VIP buffet at a luxury resort. Talk about a lucky break. If every morning starts with a feast like this, maybe being a hybrid isn't so bad. He realized everyone in his family eats like a black hole. Shifters need the fuel, but his immortal dad was also vacuuming up food. Turns out, being super requires a mountain of calories. The old man even complained the portions were light today. The MC just sat there, amazed that these two secret keepers hadn't sniffed each other out yet. Between bites, the old man dropped a bombshell on his son. He told him it was time to start prepping for the civil service exam. Talk about a mood killer. The dad claimed it was a golden opportunity, but the mom wasn't vibing with it. She wanted her 20-year-old son in college, living the campus life. Dad argued that while college is cool, being a productive member of society is better. Mom countered that she didn't want her son becoming a library hermit. The old man insisted the kid was a natural genius who didn't even need to study. Our MC just watched them bicker, realizing this was their biggest fight yet. He guessed his dad wanted him in the government, since that's where most immortals end up. But clearly, the shifter mom had a different path in mind. Flashback time again. Our boy just crushed 15 pull-ups like they were nothing. It was a miracle, considering he used to struggle with just 2. His mom explained that shifters are basically 3 times stronger than any peak human. Now it all clicked. That's why his mom was a literal powerhouse who never missed a day of training. But physical strength isn't their only cheat code. Shifters are ruled by instinct, and soon, our boy would feel those primal urges taking the wheel. Sounds complicated. So far, he felt totally normal, but the matriarch warned that animal instincts don't exactly play well in a polite society. To keep his inner beast on a leash, she wanted him to get a degree in a boring office job. But his grandfather, well, he has some shady connections with shifter-run corporations. That's why he needs the diploma, to get into a company that teaches you how to be a real predator. With both parents trying to play puppet master, our poor protagonist found himself at a lethal crossroads of fate. The truth is, he had a third path locked away in his heart that he'd never dare to mention. He dropped the bomb. He wanted to enlist in the Navy and become a hardcore Marine. The room went deathly silent. His mom looked like she wanted to flip the table, hating the idea of her elite shifter son being used as a disposable grunt in the military. She told him he was being impulsive, but our boy stood his ground, reminding them he's a grown man capable of making his own calls. His rebellion didn't go over well. The air in the room was getting heavier by the second as his mom's temper flared. Unexpectedly, the old man actually backed him up. He thought the Navy sounded like a solid move. Of course, the MC wasn't just doing it for the cool uniform or the street cred. In a world this chaotic, wanting to protect your country is a natural vibe. The dad saw it as a potentially interesting experience. He figured the kid wouldn't be sent to the front lines immediately, just some basic training and a cozy base somewhere. Our hero realized he was actually winning the argument, but his mom shut it down with a not on my watch glare. That's when the dad brought the civil service exam back into the mix as a compromise. The deal: pass the exam first, then join the military. It would give him a huge leg up in his service career. Our protagonist started doing the math in his head. He agreed to the terms, and the old man told him he better hit the books hard to make it count. Since the dad was so hyped, he'd already lined up a specialist private tutor for the job. The deal was sealed, but the MC couldn't help but notice his mom. Looked like she was ready to start a riot. Later that day, our boy set off on a journey to meet this legendary teacher. Turns out, this tutor is a mysterious farmer living in total isolation in the middle of nowhere. The MC still couldn't believe he was actually doing this, since his heart was still set on being a Marine. On the bus ride there, he tried to kill time by scrolling through his phone. The news was grim. Global tensions were boiling over and conflicts were breaking out everywhere. Seeing the reality of war actually made him second-guess his cool soldier dreams for a moment. This chaos was all thanks to the white holes that appeared after the black ones. While black holes spit things out, white holes are the doors into the enemy's home. They lead to the invader's dimension, a land of alien minerals and exotic resources just waiting to be plundered. Humanity is desperate for these resources, and shifters are the tip of the spear in these expeditions because of their raw durability. That's exactly why his mom didn't want him in the service. But our hero didn't just want to be a soldier. He wanted to be at the heart of the storm. The mysterious farmer finally picked up a call from the old man, who told him the student was arriving shortly. To begin his high-stakes exam prep, the farmer warned that he wouldn't show any mercy just because they were old friends. He promised to beat the weakness out of the kid, which sounded more like a threat than a lesson. Our poor protagonist has absolutely no idea he's walking into a training camp from hell. Finally, the farmer and our MC stood face to face, locked in an intense stare-down. The farmer looked him up and down and asked, "Who the hell are you?" The boy said he was his friend's son, but that didn't satisfy the old man. He noted the kid didn't look like an immortal at all. His physique was way too jacked for human build. The boy claimed he was a hybrid, but the farmer wasn't buying it. Immortals have dominant genes, and he knew the boy's father too well. In his mind, there was no way human genes could create a specimen this physically gifted. The MC countered that his mother's bloodline was just as potent as his father's. The farmer still thought the whole story smelled like a scam. Regardless, he told the boy to keep up. After all, class was officially in session. The protagonist reminded himself why he had traveled to this godforsaken wilderness. He was following his father's orders to prep for the exam in this inhospitable wasteland. And this farmer with the hat, looking like he just stepped out of a survival show, was officially his sensei. He had to be an immortal too, so the MC curiously asked if there were any temples nearby to pray at. The farmer gave him a weird look, but what really worried the boy was that they were trekking deeper and deeper into the mountains. Finally, they reached their classroom, and our protagonist absolutely hated the sight of it. It was just a primitive campsite, a flickering fire in a shack that looked like it was held together by hope. The MC demanded to know what he was supposed to study in a place like this. The farmer ignored him, asking if he'd actually awakened his powers and if he'd even bothered to test them. The boy admitted he'd tried cutting himself and that the auto-heal was working at high speed. Seeing the kid had passed the basic test, the farmer asked if he actually understood the mechanics of how immortals regenerate. The truth? Nobody really knows. But the how doesn't matter. The secret is endurance. The more an immortal can endure, the more godlike their healing becomes. The second phase is all about the nervous system. The sharper your senses, the more exquisite the agony. Master this, and you'll be able to map out every microscopic injury in your body with surgical precision. The whole point of this literal living hell is to crank the kid's endurance to the max and force him to dominate his own sensory input. After dropping that lore bomb, the farmer asked if the newbie had any more questions, but our MC was stuck on one horrifying detail. He blurted out, asking if he seriously had to sprint across a path paved with literal soul-piercing daggers. The farmer deadpanned that the boy needs to learn total body control, but to our hero, this lesson sounded like a one-way ticket to the morgue. Annoyed by the chatter, the farmer questioned why the kid was even here, since this torture is actually the opening act of the official exam. That's when the old man dropped a truth bomb. Wait, you weren't planning on joining the elite immortal task force? Our protagonist stood there looking like a buffoon. He was completely and utterly clueless about that little detail. It looks like his old man conveniently forgot to mention the special forces part of the career plan. The farmer broke it down. This isn't a desk job. It's basically signing your soul over to the hardcore military. He told the kid straight up, if you don't have the stomach for it, quit now and save us both the trouble. But looking at the path ahead, our MC realized that to reach the top, he'd have to conquer this nightmare or die trying. To keep his civilian clothes from becoming a bloody mess, the farmer tossed him a pair of the most hideous, eye-searing shorts imaginable. And just like that, our hero is standing there, barefoot and vulnerable, facing a path of jagged steel. Realizing the civil service exam was a lot more death-defying than he expected, the farmer barked at him to start running. Time is a luxury they don't have. The protagonist took one last lungful of air, preparing for the worst. Steeling his resolve, he took his first step. Immediately, the cold steel bit deep into his flesh. As our boy let out a blood-curdling scream, the farmer yelled at him to keep his feet moving. If this were a real battlefield, a stop would be a death sentence. The blades didn't just scratch, they sliced deep, grinding against the boy's very bones with every step. By sunset, his legs were absolute jelly. Calling this training intense would be the understatement of the century. The farmer noted the kid actually managed to sidestep a few blades, a clear sign his reflexes were already hitting high-tier levels. But that wasn't even the part that made the old man's eyes widen. The kid's auto-regen stats were off the charts, healing him at a terrifying speed. To hit peak performance, he needs more damage points, so the farmer told him to stop being a coward and quit dodging. The instruction was simple. Stomp down so hard you practically shatter your own shins for maximum regeneration practice. The old man told the kid to swallow his tears and get back to the knife marathon immediately. As our boy continued his dance of pain, the farmer started sensing something wasn't quite right with this rookie. After another lap, the farmer reminded him that immortals don't die from paper cuts and told him to go again. Our MC asked when the hell this ends, but the farmer just smirked. He told him to push past the shock and weaponize his pain tolerance. These knives are just training wheels for the real panic of a life-or-death battle. The farmer was genuinely baffled. Why hadn't the kid's brain shut down from the traumatic shock yet? Little did he know, our boy is packing a secret shifter bloodline. His system is far too rugged to black out from a few stabs. Our hero asked for a shortcut, so the farmer asked for his 50-meter dash time. The kid replied, 6 seconds. That's exactly the length of the knife track. If the kid can clear it in that time, he officially passes this hell walk. That was all the motivation our MC needed. He locked in, determined to burn through the blades, and set a new world record for suffering. Oh, and he totally lied about that 6-second time. That's just his casual stroll pace when he's not even breaking a sweat. It's going to be a world of hurt, but our boy is ready to put his senses on a leash and dominate the pain. Crossing that finish line in 6 seconds was about to be the easiest impossible feat he'd ever done. The protagonist lunged toward the razor path with zero hesitation, leaving the seasoned farmer absolutely shell-shocked by his speed. Our boy tore through the track with perfect Olympic-level form, sliding to a halt on the other side in exactly 6 seconds flat. Even with his speed, he was sucking air like his lungs were on fire, while the farmer just stared, unable to compute what he'd just seen. Realizing this kid wasn't just another recruit, but a true anomaly, he ordered him to do it again, just to prove it wasn't a fluke. To trick him into a second round of torture, the old man lied and claimed he forgot to hit the stopwatch. Finally, they moved on to the boss level of the day's training, and the old man pulled out a very sketchy-looking collar. Let's be real, it looked less like training gear and more like something you'd put on a dangerous pit bull. The farmer insisted it was vital for the next lesson and told the MC to snap it around his neck. The goal of this round: master the art of breathing while the world is literally trying to choke the life out of you. The boy finally realized why the collar was loaded with heavy metal weights. It was a trap. With one click of a remote, that collar would turn into a high-tech noose, crushing the boy's windpipe. The farmer warned him, don't even think about taking it off. He'd survive the knives. He couldn't back out now. Our boy. Honestly, his name is a disaster, so let's just call him Gustavo. Gustavo asked if they could just do some underwater breath holding instead. But the farmer shut him down. Water is too easy. This leash mimics the sensation of being manually strangled by an enemy, the ultimate survival drill. Blacking out is a real risk here. The Great War taught humans exactly how to systematically dismantle supernaturals. In the old days, they'd just hang recruits from trees. Gustavo thought the good old days sounded like a horror movie. This training was pure insanity. But since he wasn't about to tap out, he asked for the win condition. The farmer told him he'd eventually pass out, so the goal was to fight the darkness and stay conscious for at least 5 minutes. The farmer added a spicy warning. Try to break the device, and the internal spikes might just puncture your chest. Talk about high stakes. Finally, our boy braced himself for the inevitable. The farmer's finger hovered over the button. It was time to dial the suffering up to 11. As the device engaged, Gustavo's fingers instinctively clawed at the dirt in a desperate struggle. The collar constricted with bone-crushing force, cutting off his oxygen completely. Gustavo's legs turned to lead, and he collapsed to his knees, unable to stay upright. Writhing in the dust, he tried to pry the mechanical noose off his neck. But the farmer wasn't having it and slapped his hands away from the collar of agony. Seeing that Gustavo was still putting up a fight, the farmer worried he'd set the difficulty level to too easy. He figured if the pain was too sharp, the kid would just take the easy way out and black out immediately. Except Gustavo was still conscious, screaming internally for this nightmare to end. He was sure it had been an eternity. His vision began to flicker like a dying light bulb, and his internal power-off switch was teetering on the edge. It felt like his eyeballs were about to pop right out of their sockets from the pressure. Finally, the boy's nervous system hit the emergency override and his body shut down. The device clicked off, releasing its lethal grip. But then, the boy's eyes flared with a sudden light. His strength was surging back at an impossible rate. The farmer was the one who looked spooked now. He thought the remote had broken because he hadn't even touched the stop button yet. He shook the remote, figuring the battery must have died at the most convenient moment possible. Regardless of the reason, the collar lost its power and fell away from the protagonist's throat. Our warrior wheezed that he'd almost seen the light at the end of the tunnel, but the farmer just scoffed. "You're an immortal. Quit being dramatic." Since he stayed awake until the glitch, Gustavo hoped he was done with the noose, confident he'd hit the 5-minute mark. Actually, the farmer had been watching the clock the whole time with a stunned expression. Our boy hadn't just lasted 5 minutes. He'd endured the strangulation for a staggering 13 minutes. It was an absolute blowout. The previous record holder had only managed to hang on for 8. The farmer's look of annoyance turned into pure, predatory fascination, like he'd just discovered a diamond in the rough. Since the sun was dipping below the horizon, the farmer decided they'd call a day. Gustavo was shocked he'd actually get a meal, but the farmer reminded him, "You can't build a beast without high-quality fuel." Walking toward the kitchen, Gustavo offered to help out, but the farmer told him to just sit down and stay out of the way. Truth be told, Gustavo couldn't cook a bowl of cereal to save his life. He was just trying to be polite. Minutes later, he was served a bowl of something that looked like it had been scraped off a swamp floor. Its vibe was purely toxic. Gustavo stared at the mystery sludge with a heart full of regret and terror. He tentatively asked what was in it, but the farmer just told him ignorance is bliss and to eat up. Later that night, our boy was outside, trying to dry his sweat-soaked gear. While cleaning up, he vowed to take over the kitchen duties. It was officially time to learn how to cook for survival. But first, he needed some answers from his old man. He had to get on the phone with his dad ASAP. Drained to his very core, all Gustavo wanted was to faceplant into a bed and disappear for 10 hours. But when he stepped back into the rickety shack, his hope for a good night's rest died instantly. After slapping a mosquito into oblivion, he turned to the farmer with one burning question. He asked if there was any chance of getting electricity, but the farmer just grunted that light is just a come-hither sign for the blood-sucking bugs. Completely ghosting the kid, the farmer is already passed out and snoring peacefully on the floor. Gustavo sighed, realizing there wasn't much else to do in this bug-infested shack. With no other choice, he slumped down onto the hard ground as well. Just before drifting off, he heard the old man mumble that this was all to sharpen his senses, and since it was his first night, he'd probably be too wired to sleep. But before the farmer could even finish his sentence, he was left speechless, because Gustavo was already sawing logs right next to him. This rookie was proving to be a box of surprises, getting more impressive by the second. The sun rose on a new day of torture, and breakfast was served, which in classic fashion looked like something pulled out of a garbage disposal. Still, a hungry Gustavo showed some manners and thanked the chef for the fuel. The farmer noted that immortals have a god-tier metabolism, meaning they need to vacuum up calories like a black hole. While staring at that culinary crime on his plate, Gustavo asked what the lesson was for today. The farmer casually mentioned they'd be chucking themselves off massive cliffs. The goal? Master breath control during free fall and fine-tune those senses. Gustavo realized that for an immortal, staying conscious during a high-velocity impact or a chokehold is a literal lifesaver. The farmer nodded, adding a pro tip. Never lose your legs, or you're a sitting duck. Use your arms as a meat shield instead. Sacrificing an arm to keep your brain box intact is a high-level play. The same logic applies to protecting your precious legs. He warned that high-frequency blades and massive explosives are their biggest keep-away items. But then, the old man barked at him to eat faster. They had a packed schedule of near-death experiences today. And sure enough, Our boy was yeeted off a skyscraper-sized cliff, Lion King style. After surviving that plummeting session, the exhausted kid was finally sent back to civilization. The second he stepped onto the bus, he whipped out his phone to call for backup. While venting to his dad, Gustavo asked if he'd been sent to a training camp or a murder site, which just left the old man sounding confused. Gustavo described the insanity, but his dad just laughed it off. His son is an immortal now, so a little cliff diving won't kill him. It was crucial for the boy to test his limiters, and the most shocking discovery was that Gustavo was already hitting beast mode levels of strength. Now, the kid is itching to know when the actual civil service exam is. But the old man hung up mid-sentence because his wife started barking orders about chores. The truth is, knowing the date wouldn't change the grind. Gustavo just needed to crash and burn his own bed. Back at the house, our hero dived into a hot bath, proving that running water is the ultimate luxury. He even squeezed in some gaming. Hey, he's only 20, and at that age, a high score is way more enticing than a date. Right after that, he finally shoveled some actual, edible food into his face. Sinking into a plush, soft mattress felt like heaven compared to the dirt floor of a mountain shack. The next morning, Gustavo woke up feeling like $1,000,000, convinced the day would be a breeze. But then, the matriarch appeared, declaring she needed her dear son to tag along with her today. Instant RIP for the poor guy who just wanted to rot on the couch all day. Mom dropped the hammer. It's time to study for university, and she'd already packed his bags for a study retreat. She'd scouted a private tutor who lived nearby to help him cram for the entrance exams. Our boy is booked for a 2-day stay with this tutor, but one look at his mom's face told him this was going to be another round of hell. A dark cloud of dread settled over him. It was clearly going to be 48 hours of pure agony. After dropping him off at the secret location, the matriarch prepared to leave, and Gustavo asked if he'd at least get an introduction. But his mother just gave him a chilling parting shot. You better be clever, kid. Especially since your body is currently as fragile as glass. Now our MC feels totally ghosted, realizing the next 2 days are going to be a recap-style nightmare. Seriously, his family tree is just a forest of complications. The elevator pinged as it began its deep descent into the basement. The doors finally hissed open, revealing the next stage for our protagonist. He stepped out, scanning the underground bunker with total suspicion. The floor was lined with high-end treadmills and racks of heavy iron. It was basically a hardcore underground gym. This was definitely not the library Gustavo was expecting for his study session. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over him as his new mentor approached. Our hero was instantly wide-eyed. The woman in the gym gear, looking like a low-budget Wolverine, already knew he was Selma's kid. By the way, Selma is his mom's name. The boy nodded, admitting he had zero clue why he was being sent to a dungeon. The trainer just smirked, knowing the kid had been studying with an immortal lately. She called it a total waste of his shifter potential. Poor kid, he's still keeping his dual bloodline secret under wraps. Mom has a very tough love philosophy. You're responsible for the mess you make. That charming smile of hers is just a mask for a woman who is terrifyingly strict. If he didn't survive this boxing class with Selma's friend, he was in for a legendary parental beatdown. This whole training session was basically a survive or die trial. The trainer tossed a high-tech watch at Gustavo. Since he's already traumatized by weird gadgets, he asked if it was another suffocation collar. She just said it was a data tracker. Gustavo realized the evaluation was starting, and he was the lab rat. She pointed a finger toward the first station. It was time to put those legs to work. Our boy took his first tentative steps onto the belt of the treadmill. Every heartbeat and breath was being analyzed on a monitor. The trainer quickly realized the kid had never actually set foot in a gym before. And man, does it show, his form was honestly pathetic. His heart was steady, but his pace was a joke. Poor kid. On top of the savage insults, he was mourning his lost gaming time. The trainer groaned about how lazy the new generation is. But to Gustavo, she didn't look a day over 25 herself. Then it clicked. Supernaturals age like fine wine, painfully slow. Getting bored, he asked how long this cardio nightmare would last, but she just barked at him to shut up and keep running. It was time to strip away that weak civilian exterior, vowing that by the time she was done, Gustavo would be a brand new man. That sounded more like a threat than a promise to our terrified hero. He muttered that he didn't need a second mom, which actually earned him a dark smile from the trainer. The sun had long since set, and the world was dark. But Gustavo was still on that treadmill, legs moving like a machine. The trainer couldn't believe he was already flagging. She told him stopping now would be a spit in the face to his bloodline. Gasping for air, the boy wheezed out a question. How long has it been? He was shocked to find he'd been running for 14 straight hours, a feat that defied human logic. He didn't sign up for an all-nighter. At least with the immortal old man, he got a power nap. The trainer scoffed, calling him an amateur who desperately needed this reshaping. To help him out, she flipped on a TV right in front of the treadmill. It started playing a loop of complex stretching routines that he had to memorize while mid-sprint. She preached that a rigid body is a dead body. Flexibility is the ultimate weapon. Gustavo wanted to argue, but his tongue felt like sandpaper. Besides, he had a new job, timekeeper. Wait, let me fix that. He had to be the clock because the trainer would randomly quiz him on the time to test his focus. So the poor guy has to mimic these weird, pretzel-like stretches. While hanging onto every word the trainer says, it's pure psychological warfare. But when you're already neck-deep in the grind, what's a little more pain? Gustavo was already in too deep to quit. His mind drifted back to his days on the cliffside with the farmer. The old man had said his senses were getting there, but he lacked true synergy. You don't just block one sense to boost another. You have to weave them all together like a perfect symphony. And that's exactly what our boy is doing right now. Tracking the clock, burning the stretches into his memory, and tracking every command from the trainer. All while his legs continue their never-ending marathon. Every tick of the clock felt like 1,000 years. Until finally, Gustavo hit the 24-hour mark of nonstop cardio. Finally, the treadmill slowed to a halt, and he could step back onto solid ground. The trainer checked her phone and gave a rare nod of approval. She was genuinely surprised the kid's brain hadn't turned to mush. But the break was over. It was time to get into those pretzel stretches for real. She's about to give a masterclass in flexibility, and our boy needs to pay close attention if he wants to survive. The trainer began to contort her frame in such an exotic, bone-defying manner that it defied logic. Gustavo stood there, jaw on the floor. He couldn't believe someone packed with that much lean muscle could be that insanely supple. Now it was time for the rookie to step into the ring and test his own limits. He immediately went for broke, trying to arch his spine into a full bridge. But his muscles were stiff as a board, and he could barely find his rhythm or range of motion. The trainer noted that true flexibility is a slow grind. He needs to respect the process and stretch his fibers bit by bit. Little did she know, our boy has the ultimate cheat code. He's an immortal who regenerates at God's speed. So he forced his body into the position instantly, accompanied by a chorus of terrifying pops and cracks that nearly gave his trainer a heart attack. Looking visibly shaken, she rushed over, convinced she was about to witness a medical emergency. She warned him that a human body shouldn't make those noises and told him to back off, but Gustavo just grinned and said he'd never felt better. With a casual wiggle of his fingers to show off, Gustavo proved he had completely conquered the impossible pose. That was the exact moment the trainer realized she wasn't dealing with a normal kid, but a total freak of nature. Even so, the poor guy was stuck like a pretzel and needed her help to actually untangle his limbs. Since he'd survived the workout, it was time for a reward, a massive slab of meat that looked like an entire roasted hog. Gustavo asked if they were actually supposed to share that beast, but the trainer clarified that the whole thing was just his appetizer. She was planning to demolish an entire pig herself, which is honestly terrifying to imagine. This is part of the shifter discipline. They have to learn to store massive amounts of fuel, which is vital for outlasting enemies in a grind. The two of them dived in, tearing through the feast like a pack of starving wolves. The trainer told him to just toss the bones on the floor. Housekeeping would deal with it later. At least the food was 5-star quality. She warned him that every scrap had to go because wasting calories is a sin in their world. Our boy promised to leave a clean plate, and after the feast, the trainer announced she was heading out, telling him to go into a food coma for a few hours. Finally, our hero is alone in his room, which is a massive upgrade from sleeping in the dirt with mosquitoes the size of prehistoric birds. He even has signal, so he decides to check in with his mom. When she picked up, he could hear the worry in Selma's voice. Turns out, she was the one who told the trainer not to go easy on him. But now she was feeling guilty, and Gustavo realized his extra suffering was thanks to a protective mom. Still, her anxiety is so high that she threatened to ask for an even harder regime if she felt he was slacking. Since his dad just walked in, she had to cut the call short. That quick chat left our poor boy even more mentally drained and confused than before. By the second day, the core of shifter training clicked for him. It's about doing simple drills until you shatter your limits. There's a lot of high-tech science involved here, with sensors and gadgets tracking his every move. After analyzing the data, the trainer's verdict was brutal. His reflexes were absolute trash. She ordered him to deadlift a bar. Looking at the iron, he estimated it was about 100 pounds. Tossing that around would be light work for someone with his shifter strength. The trainer gave a sinister smirk and told him to follow her. She commanded him to run at full tilt while lugging that heavy weight. And as the saying goes, when it rains, it pours, and Gustavo was about to get soaked. The poor guy had to sprint along a path so narrow it was practically a tightrope over a void. The trainer preached about the importance of balance, but he doubted if his feet would even fit on the board. The wooden plank was way too slim. Our boy was sweating bullets, thinking a single slip would lead to a world of hurt. The trainer shrugged, saying it was only a 10-foot drop. Not fatal, but definitely not a pleasant experience. The golden rule for shifters: don't get hit because they don't have the auto-repair system of an immortal. Knowing his biology was actually much tougher than she realized, he decided to just floor it, since danger wasn't really in his vocabulary. Seeing him charge like a madman, the trainer actually started to panic for his safety. But our MC had dialed his senses to the max. His balance was pinpoint perfect. Since he's doubling down with his immortal bloodline, his spatial awareness is on a whole different level. It turned out to be a walk in the park. Almost fun, actually. Not having to dodge daggers while running was a luxury. Once he hit the other side, the kid thought he was home free. But the trainer just held up 4 fingers. He had to do it 4 more times. Gustavo kept up the pace, blurring across the line with blistering speed. The trainer was becoming more fascinated by the second. The kid was pulling off flawless runs without a single wobble. Time to turn up the heat. This time, the wooden board was replaced with a thin steel cable. Gustavo realized that the tutorial was over and the real game had begun. He tried to talk his way out of it, but she shut him down. Even shifter toddlers could handle the wooden board. She hadn't expected much from him, but she admitted she'd lowballed his potential. His senses were top tier. She tossed down some mats, just in case, warning him to try and snag the cable if he felt himself slipping. At least he didn't have to carry the weights this time. Compared to the immortal torture camp, this was practically a vacation. Still, tightrope walking on a steel wire is a nightmare for anyone. Testing the wire, he noticed it was incredibly tense and barely had any give. With no wind to knock him off and safety mats below, he felt his confidence growing. He realized there was zero reason to be afraid. Gathering his guts, Gustavo took the all-or-nothing approach. He just sprinted across the cable. He nearly bit it halfway through when the wire wobbled, forcing him to slow down and actually use some finesse and control. Every single step had to be a masterclass in calculation. Keeping his center of gravity locked, our boy pushed through to the end. The trainer watched in silence, her fascination turning into genuine respect. Finally, the session wrapped up, and she told him she'd see him next weekend for more fun. Gustavo is now slumped in the passenger seat of his mom's car. Guessing he had a million questions, Selma decided it was time for some real talk. She told him she couldn't bear the thought of him being a victim in this chaotic world. He needed to weaponize the body he was born with. He couldn't stay a normal weakling forever. This was ironic to Gustavo, since he's already a beast. But since his heart is set on the Marines, this hell training is just a stepping stone to his ultimate goal. Dinner that night was a battlefield. Selma was impressed by how much food the kid was vacuuming up. He was eating like a creature possessed. Our boy admitted he'd finally realized his mom was a master chef. He even mentioned wanting to learn the culinary arts, joked that buff guys who cook are ultimate lady killers. Selma agreed. Well, with the cooking part. She teased that he'd actually need to look muscular first, rather than just average. To her, he still looked like one of those lazy dudes hanging out at the park all day. Regardless, our boy wants to master the stove, since the immortal side of his life doesn't seem to value a good meal. While chilling, Gustavo started daydreaming about his next session with the old farmer, hoping for something a bit more low impact and less bloody. He was certain of one thing. No matter what the old man had planned, it couldn't possibly be worse than what he'd already been through. Oh, the naivety of protagonist. Cut to our poor guy in a literal terminal freefall. The sound of his body slamming into the dirt was loud enough to send every bird in the forest flying in terror. The farmer grunted that they'd finished the intro and that none of that even counted toward the actual exam. Everything up until now was just the bare minimum to even qualify for the real training. After being yeeted off a cliff, the kid had officially finished his warm-up. Unlike the shifter drills, the pain here is explosive but fades fast as his body knits itself back together. However, the farmer is the ultimate taskmaster. Taking a bullet? That's easy mode for an immortal. But getting carved up by a master swordsman? That's where things get messy. He explained that if the injury isn't fatal, let it happen, but you must protect your vitals at all costs. The old man's grin was straight up villainous. Gustavo nervously asked why he was suddenly unsheathing a sword, and the farmer mocked him for not seeing the obvious. It was time for a lesson in tactical evasion, learning how to dodge steel and how to take the hit where it hurts the least. Our hero is now literally fighting for his life, focusing every ounce of energy on keeping his head on his shoulders, all while the farmer swings that blade with terrifying, murderous intent. The old man noted the boy's growth, but insisted he master the art of managing damage. Minor cuts are fine, but a lost limb is a failure. And then, the first strike connected, a searing gash across our boy's chest. High-stakes training has officially begun. The old-timer coached him to tank hits with his shins if the enemy aimed for his thighs. The trick is to twist the body just enough so the blade can't bite deep into the vitals. Basically, Gustavo is taking a crash course in the art of getting butchered correctly. His healing factor is absolutely cracked, even by immortal standards. This only fires up the coach more, giving him an excuse to be even more brutal with his lessons. Gustavo finally realized that his time in this mountain hellscape was going to be anything but a walk in the park. The poor kid is bleeding so much his blood is practically becoming premium fertilizer for the local flora. In a state of pure exhaustion, he learned a grim truth. Blood loss is the Achilles heel of an immortal. Plugging the leaks is life or death. Since Gustavo was running on empty, they called a timeout for food, and our boy volunteered to play chef. Back at the base, he fired up his portable camping stove. He whipped up a legendary pasta recipe he'd learned from his mom, the kind of comfort food that heals the soul. Even a grumpy farmer couldn't resist taking a big bite. The old man admitted the kid had some serious skills in the kitchen, and Gustavo was just relieved his teacher had actual taste buds. But the farmer quickly flipped the script. Cooking is just another form of ironclad discipline, kid. Part of the grind is learning to stomach even the most repulsive flavors without flinching. No time for a food coma. It was straight back outside for more physical conditioning. The farmer vanished in a blur, reappearing just to deliver a devastating gut punch. The sheer impact was so heavy it sent the poor guy's blood pressure into a freefall. Lesson of the day: how to manually reboot and regenerate your internal organs on the fly. Step 1 is applying pressure to stop the internal leaks. Those deep tissue repairs take a lot more juice to heal. What really messed with Gustavo's head was the old man's speed. He didn't even see the hit coming. The farmer explained he was masking his energy, rendering Gustavo's heightened senses completely useless. Our boy is desperate to learn that stealth mode technique, just as his internal wounds finished knitting back together. Sensing the kid's hunger for power, the farmer gave him a predatory look and asked if he was truly ready for the secret sauce. Without skipping a beat, Gustavo shouted a resounding yes. 2 grueling days later, our hero found himself back in that familiar elevator, ready to absorb more punishment from his muscle-bound female trainer. Suddenly, a chill ran down his spine, the unmistakable sensation of a gun barrel leveled at his head. He nervously asked if they were using rubber rounds. She just gave a mysterious maybe. She pulled the trigger, and a round whistled past his ear, narrowly missing his skull. That's a high-pressure gas pistol firing specialized pain rounds. Today's curriculum: Bullet Dodging 101. Surprisingly, the poor guy actually looked hyped for it. As the gunfire echoed through the gym, he turned into a blur, sprinting across the facility. The trainer reminded him that bullets are lethal. Honestly, does everyone in this world love stating the obvious? He needs to hug the cover or stay in constant, erratic motion to keep from being turned into a human pincushion. One of the rounds finally caught up to him, grazing his arm and drawing blood. The trainer barked that a single hit could end his career. If he can't dodge, he has to frame his body to minimize the carnage. This mountain of agony felt eerily similar to the hell he endured at the Immortal training camp. Comparing the two regimes, Gustavo realized a pattern. Their tactics are precision-engineered for his specific biologies. Neither of these monsters is just teaching him a martial art. The endgame is one thing, and one thing only: absolute survival. Every day, he's refining his body into a more perfect instrument of war. As an immortal, the number one priority is staying away from the business end of a blade. Sharp steel is bad news, and high-caliber ordnance is even worse for the undying. On the flip side, shifters don't sweat the blades. Their skin is like armor, making firearms the real threat. Even shotguns lose their bite at a distance, and a shifter's speed is the ultimate counter to a bad aim. After a while, the gym floor was carpeted in spent shell casings. Finally, time for a tactical breather. But rest for the trainer meant running laps while carrying massive iron weights. Hey, at least it's better than being a human pincushion on a knife track. It was time for another high-wire act on the steel cable, but midway through, he felt a wave of pure, unadulterated bloodlust. The sheer, crushing pressure of that aura was so overwhelming that our boy's nerves fried and he lost his footing. He tried to scramble back, but his legs gave out and he slammed into the floor. Shaking with terror, Gustavo scanned the room for the monster that emitted that killing intent. But his trainer was just standing there, looking perfectly calm. She looked at him with intrigue, asking if a rookie like him could actually sense it. The question only served to confuse our protagonist even more. She dubbed it savage energy and was floored that he could feel it so clearly. Gustavo begged her not to do that again. It felt like his heart was about to burst. She just chuckled, telling him he'd get used to the weight once he awakened his own energy. And just like that, it was back to the grindstone. After 2 more days, he stopped falling off the wire and started developing an immunity to that crushing aura. His immortal senses acted like a radar, helping him brace against the psychic pressure. By locking his core, the high-wire walk started feeling like a stroll on the sidewalk. Watching his progress, the trainer was genuinely impressed by his growth spurt. Gustavo kept pushing his limits. Meanwhile, the immortal training still felt like a VIP tour of the underworld. The old farmer was now rotating through different weapons to teach the kid how to patch up his internal organs. He even started setting lethal traps, making the training ground a total minefield. Constant, grinding pain can break a man's mind. The kid has to learn to stay sane through the agony. Immortals treat their limbs like disposable tools, so he must master his pain receptors before they cloud his combat judgment. Across town, the shifter boot camp was reaching a fever pitch. Our boy was now a walking tank, moving with heavy weights strapped to his body while still pumping iron. The stakes were rising. Small update: his dad had to head out on a 10-day business trip. The moment the old man returned, he was showered with affection by his wife. Man, these two are a total power couple. The farmer finally stopped turning our boy into a shish kebab and started teaching him the way of the blade. Firearms are too straightforward, but close quarters combat, well, that seemed to be hardwired into Gustavo's DNA, likely thanks to his shifter side. Ironically, his muscular shifter trainer was the one teaching him how to handle a gun. Martial arts have their place, but with his raw shifter power, he only needs the basics to dominate. Since our boy is a hybrid getting the best of both worlds, his skills started to synchronize perfectly. Before he knew it, 2 months had vanished in the blink of an eye. Gustavo was actually starting to vibe with the rhythm, and the old man noted that the kid was practically living in the gym. He commented on how jacked the boy was getting, which was music to the matriarch's ears. In that house, any compliment is just a green light for the parents to get mushy. Gustavo wondered why he didn't have siblings, considering his parents' active lifestyle. Later, while freshening up in the bathroom, Gustavo took a long look at his new self in the mirror. He was baffled as to why he was still single. He's young, shredded, and a looker. It was high time for a romantic plot armor upgrade. Suddenly, his mom's phone started buzzing. She was off to meet a friend whose daughter was a high school senior and going through a rough patch. That left the father alone, chilling in the living room. He noticed a phone sitting right there on the coffee table. Our boy came out looking for a hairdryer, but the room was empty. He shrugged, sat down, and started mindlessly scrolling through his own phone. The big exam was tomorrow, and our boy finally had to face the music. His old schoolmates thought he was a loser for skipping university, but a degree was never part of Gustavo's master plan. His destiny was forged 9 years ago, when the first massive black hole tore the sky open. Back then, a young Gustavo was trapped under the ruins, watching a hero charge fearlessly into a swarm of invaders. In that moment of chaos, the boy made a vow. He'd grow up to be exactly like that warrior. To his mother, that dream is a nightmare. She just wants her son to live a safe, boring, and normal life. Under the radar, the matriarch slipped out for a secret rendezvous. And surprise, surprise, the person she's meeting is none other than our boy's hardcore trainer. The trainer smirked, asking what elaborate lie Selma had cooked up to get out of the house this time. Selma chuckled, admitting she just used the classic meeting a neighbor excuse to keep the peace. As the two settled in for a drink, the trainer leaned in, curious if Selma really didn't want the spicy details on Gustavo's progress. With a flicker of sadness, Selma sighed, saying she'd kept her expectations low since a half-blood hybrid usually lacks the raw firepower of a pure shifter. She hadn't pressed for info because she'd already braced herself for the news that her son was struggling. Meanwhile, the protagonist's father was locked into an incredibly high-stakes phone call. On the other end was the old farmer, and he was about to drop a massive bombshell. He told the dad straight up, "Your son isn't just a hybrid. He's an irregular." Back at the bar, Selma expressed her fear that her son might be targeted by scientists looking for a new laboratory guinea pig. The trainer nodded solemnly. It's no secret that shadowy groups are obsessed with creating the ultimate hybrid, the legendary irregulars. Up until now, every attempt had been a disaster, resulting in unstable monsters with conflicting powers. The world had written off the idea, concluding that diluting supernatural blood with human genes only led to a weaker, failed result. But the trainer had a game-changing update for the worried mother. She looked Selma in the eye and revealed that her son was the exception to every rule. Back on the phone, the dad was still worried his boy was a weakling, but the farmer doubled down. The kid is a straight-up genius. He'd already mastered the art of energy masking, a feat that left his father reeling since even veterans struggle with that technique. At the same time, the gym trainer told Selma the most shocking part. Gustavo was already successfully channeling savage energy. That bit of intel hit his mother like a physical blow to the chest. Both parents were left in a state of absolute shock, unable to process the news. In their minds, such a level of growth should have been physically impossible. Yet, both legendary trainers were adamant. The boy was a once-in-a-century anomaly. A total, une adulte raté de combat prodigie. The shock quickly turned into overwhelming pride. They had unknowingly raised the ultimate heir. The next morning, our hero rolled out of bed feeling like a zombie and managed a groggy good morning to his mom. His dad had already vanished into the early morning commute, and the matriarch nudged the boy toward the kitchen. Gustavo's eyes nearly popped out. The breakfast table looked like a five-star king's feast. Selma teased him, asking if he'd forgotten what day it was, D-Day for the civil service exam. Remembering the farmer's brutal lessons, the boy realized the stakes. All that blood and sweat had been leading to this moment. In a matter of seconds, he vacuumed up every single calorie on the table. Mom asked if he was ready, and Gustavo groaned that he'd studied so hard he was literally having exam nightmares. Poor guy. Looking concerned, Selma mentioned that the old man would be crushed if he failed. But you could see the truth in her eyes. She'd actually be thrilled if he flunked, anything to keep him away from the government's dangerous work. Gustavo told her not to sweat it. Little did she know, he was rocking an immortal's core. He flashed back to the recent grind, remembering the days when he was still struggling to keep his head above water. He recalled the intense sparring sessions where he had to go toe-to-toe with his own mother in the ring. Selma had pushed him hard, insisting he had the stuff to conquer any challenge the world threw at him. As he stepped into the elevator to leave, Gustavo hummed along to the smooth bossa nova tracks playing through the speakers. But then his immortal senses kicked in, making the quiet humming feel like a concert in his head. He cleared his throat, trying to play it cool. He was vibing to the music until the door slid open, revealing an unexpected visitor. Standing right, there was a girl he knew all too well. Our protagonist felt a wave of instant, awkward embarrassment. The girl, Elena, smirked and told him he didn't need to serenade her every time he wanted to ask her out. Gustavo told her to give her rest, but when she pushed for confession, he shut her down by saying she wasn't even his type. That comment triggered Elena's war mode, and she looked ready to launch a full-scale tactical strike on his ego. After escalating the tension to the brink of a border conflict, Elena reminded him that she was a top-tier beauty with the brains to match. But Gustavo was immune to her charms. He calmly stepped out of the elevator, telling her she really needed to stop the drama. As he headed down the street, he told her to stop tailing him, making Elena even more curious about his plans. When he mentioned the civil service exam, her jaw dropped. She never pegged our resident slacker for a government hopeful. Claiming he was on a tight schedule, Gustavo tried to shake her off. She bragged about her upcoming uni life at an elite all-women's college. Knowing she'd have a line of simps out the door, Gustavo just told her to stay focused on her books. As he walked away, Elena shouted that she'd still love to be his girl, but our MC didn't even look back. And as we know, nothing triggers a girl's temper faster than being ignored. Gustavo shook his head. Some things never change. She was still the same stubborn, bold girl from his childhood. Finally, the bus pulled up to take him to the final destination of his journey. Gustavo stepped into a massive, imposing government building. He was early, but the maze of hallways was already making his head spin. He approached the front desk and announced he was there for the special exam track. Suddenly, a mountain of a man in a tight suit loomed over him, questioning if he was really a candidate. The guy's gaze was sharp enough to cut glass, clearly trying to rattle the newbie. With total skepticism written all over his face, the guard demanded to see the boy's credentials. Once his ID cleared, Gustavo hopped into the elevator, heading to the designated floor. On the next level, a female officer asked for his paperwork one last time. Unlike the mountain man downstairs, she was incredibly professional and polite. She pointed him toward a long, quiet hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, he reached the door, the entrance to the special exam room. Gustavo prayed the walls were thick because he was expecting a bloodbath, and they were right in the heart of the city. Switching into high alert mode, he braced his body for an ambush the second he crossed the threshold, convinced the test will be 10 times more lethal than the training he'd survived. But when the door swung open, he found himself in a boring, silent, and completely empty classroom. A lone proctor looked up and noted that Gustavo was the very first person to show up. The man was as bald as a bowling ball and reached out for his documents. Since baldness is easily cured in this era, seeing someone without hair was like seeing a unicorn. There was only one logical conclusion. This guy was rocking the bald look as a deliberate style choice. As he handed over his ID, Gustavo's internal alarm bells were screaming. This whole setup felt too normal. The bald man assigned him seat number 48 and told him to get settled. This was nothing like the combat trials he'd expected. Gustavo was still twitchy, waiting for a hidden assassin to jump out of the ceiling. He kept his energy coiled, ready to strike at a moment's notice. He sat in total silence, preparing for the inevitable twist. After a few minutes, the room began to fill with other hopeful candidates. But instead of weapons, they were all clutching textbooks and feverishly reading over their notes. It was in that moment that our protagonist realized he'd experienced the biggest shock of his entire life. The bald proctor stood up and announced the start of the session, casually asking if anyone had forgotten a pen. Gustavo felt a wave of icy cold sweat wash over him. With a shaking hand, he slowly raised it, realizing he was the only one there without a writing utensil. 1,000 questions raced through his mind at lightning speed. But unfortunately for our boy, he didn't have a single answer. He was 100% certain that a massive mistake had been made. But he had no idea whether to blame his parents, his trainers, or the government. It hit him. All those months of death training might have been completely unnecessary torture. Even so, he had to play the hand he was dealt. If he wanted that government job, he had to beat this challenge too. But a massive hurdle was standing in his way. The actual, written exam was starting in T-minus 5 minutes. The universe was definitely playing a joke on him. He had trained to survive a war, but he didn't even have a pen for a quiz. The bald man sighed and tossed him a spare pen. It was a standard, plastic ballpoint, the ultimate sign that he was about to face a boring, theoretical exam. This feels exactly like a high school final. Our MC is standing there feeling like a total clown for over-preparing. He looked around and realized the competition was on a different level. Everyone there looked like they walked off a runway. Seriously, half these candidates had enough main character energy to become instant K-pop idols. But even in this sea of top-tier visuals, one guy in particular was radiating a different kind of aura. The dude's hands were literally flawless. They looked like they were sculpted for a high-end jewelry magazine. The handsome stranger sensed Gustavo's intense staring, but he just hit him with a cold shoulder and went back to his own business. Dying of embarrassment, Gustavo just prayed he didn't come off as some desperate creep. Suddenly, The staff marched into the room to start the lockdown. They rolled in these massive, heavy-duty partitions, boxing our protagonist into a tiny, isolated cubicle. The atmosphere shifted instantly. This was the real deal. One last person skidded into the room. Candidate number 50, barely making the cut. Wildly enough, they let him in. In any normal exam, that latecomer would have been kicked to the curb. As soon as he skimmed the first page, Gustavo realized the level of this test was no joke. His brain started short-circuiting. Sprinting across daggers was a walk in the park compared to this mental gymnastics. But then, as he dug deeper, something clicked. The first question was a scenario about a severe leg injury and the immediate tactical procedure. Despite his initial panic, it was a total layup. The answer was obviously to prioritize stopping the hemorrhage. A gash like that is just a scratch for an immortal, a fact he'd learned through pure, unadulterated agony, under the tender care of that psychotic farmer. Every single question was basically a highlight reel of the practical torture he'd already survived. Since our boy never blacks out from blood loss, the crazy old man used to treat him like a training dummy with a huge grin on his face. If a blade is coming and you can't dodge, the exam asks for the next move. The answer is to sacrifice an arm to protect the vitals. It was almost too easy. It turned out his senseless suffering was actually the perfect study guide. He felt like the lead in that movie where the guy knows every answer because of his life story. Slumdog Millionaire vibes, for those who appreciate the classics. This whole test was a filter to see if candidates actually understood the biology of an immortal. And, thanks to his trainers, Gustavo knew his own body better than anyone. He was blazing through the pages like it was child's play. He hadn't just been training his muscles. He'd been studying for a PhD in survival without even realizing it. The final question was a curveball. How can an immortal actually be killed, excluding drowning or being buried alive? For our protagonist, the answer was written in the scars on his soul. He slammed his pen down and checked the clock. The bald proctor looked up, shocked by the speed. The examiner figured the kid was just giving up, but since there was an hour left, he told him he could turn his paper and beat it. Gustavo strutted out of the room, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. He bumped into the sweet, short-haired girl from earlier. She gave him a stern but cute reminder that everything inside was top secret. She needed his signature on a non-disclosure agreement. Plus, he made sure to mention he was rocking that rare human hybrid bloodline. Still being an absolute angel, the girl flashed him a smile and wished him luck on the results. Gustavo was over the moon. Being a total amateur with women, one smile from a pretty girl, and he was already planning their wedding in his head. Later that night, deep inside the high-security government building, the bald proctor was busy grading the submissions. When he reached Gustavo's paper, he was stunned. The final answer was dead on: strangulation, extreme freezing, incineration, or total crushing. Those are the four horsemen of the apocalypse for anyone with an immortal core. The truth is, immortals are terrifyingly hard to kill, and they often forget they can die, which is why the government has to remind them of their mortality. That last question is the ultimate litmus test to see if a candidate is humble or just arrogant. They can heal, sure, but they aren't gods. They have to stay sharp or they'll end up as a statistic. The proctor noted that the hybrid kid had massive potential, at least on paper, but he still couldn't wrap his head around the kid. He was first in, first out, and didn't even bring a damn pen to a written exam. 2 weeks of agonizing waiting passed, and then his phone finally buzzed. The verdict was in. Gustavo had officially cleared the hurdle. And it wasn't just a simple pass. He had a major flex to show his mom. He had absolutely dominated the exam, taking the #1 spot with the highest score. The matriarch stood there, completely floored by her son's hidden genius. But like any proud mama, she immediately flipped into celebration mode, dying to brag to her husband about their prodigy. To mark the occasion, Gustavo asked for an all-you-can-eat feast, and his mom was more than happy to oblige. The old man walked through the door shortly after. Our hero was hyped to see his dad, feeling like he'd finally proven his worth. But let's be real, his eyes were mostly locked on the premium steaks his dad brought home. In record time, the kitchen was sizzling with the sound of top-tier beef. The small family sat down to celebrate the huge win. Dad played it cool, saying he knew his son had it in him, while Mom was just beaming with pride. Gustavo admitted the test was a breeze compared to the cliff-jumping simulator the crazy farmer put him through. Next up were the interviews, the easy part of the quest, or so he thought. Mom asked which department he'd be joining. Dad played it safe, suggesting he'd end up in a standard administrative role like the Ministry of Interior. That got Gustavo's gears turning. He noticed his dad was definitely holding something back, but his mom was too happy to notice the subtle deflection. Gustavo started wondering, why is the government recruiting immortals so aggressively? What kind of dirty work are they really doing? He had a million questions, but he knew his dad was a vault when it came to government secrets. That night, he tried to fish for some interview cheats, but his dad wouldn't budge an inch. His "I'm a genius" hype didn't last long. Reality was about to set in. Stage 2, the interviews. Time to see if he had the personality to match the power. His dad's only advice was to be brutally honest. The interview was a test of his core character, not just his muscles. As he walked out looking sharp in a fitted suit, his mom couldn't help but feel a bit of empty nest anxiety. But she shook it off, telling him he looked like a natural-born leader. Gustavo gave her a quick thanks, feeling the pressure start to build. Standing in the elevator, he practiced his serious face and went over his mental notes. Checking his reflection, he honestly started thinking he had the visuals to lead a boy band. And of course, Elena was standing right there, catching our boy mid-pose while he was admiring his own jawline. Gustavo was convinced she was using some kind of GPS tracker on him, but she insisted they were just cosmically destined to share the same commute. She teased him about taking some private lessons together, but Gustavo hit her with the "I'm a busy government official now" card. Still, she couldn't help but admit he looked dangerously good in that suit. Fueled by that ego boost, our hero just smirked and said, "I know." Now, he's in a high-tension waiting room for the interview. The other candidates looked like they were prepping for a board meeting at a Fortune 500 company. Then he spotted him, the magazine hand guy from the written exam, looking as princely as ever. Their eyes locked for a second before the handsome rival looked away with total indifference. Gustavo couldn't tell if the guy was arrogant or just shy, but he made a mental note to keep his distance. Then, the wait was over. "Candidate 48, please enter." It was showtime. Gustavo stepped into the room to face the firing squad of interviewers. First up was a pale, red-headed guy who looked like he hadn't seen the sun in a decade. He looked like a human candle. And sitting right next to him was the friendly, short-haired girl from before, looking much more professional today. The opening question was the classic. "Why do you want this job?" He almost said, "Because my dad forced me," but he caught himself. Instead, he said he wanted to discover the true ceiling of his potential. He added the classic patriot line about wanting to be the shield that protects the people and the land. The redhead asked if he was ready to die for a stranger. Gustavo paused. He said it depends on the math. He'd only sacrifice himself if it was the most efficient way to save everyone. The pens started scratching across the clipboards, making Gustavo's heart race. They kept firing questions, and he kept hitting them with raw, honest logic. Then came the trap. "Your mom and your girlfriend are both drowning. Who do you save?" Gustavo didn't blink both. His reasoning? "Because I'm a world-class swimmer." Next question. Then the final scenario. 1 bullet, 2 targets. What's the play? Gustavo's answer. "Shoot the first one and beat the second one into a pulp with my bare hands." It's a hilarious mental image that could make anyone lose it. Even a friendly girl couldn't help but let a small smirk escape. A few days later, Gustavo was peak slacking, mindlessly scrolling through videos on his phone. His loud laughter echoed through the house, making the matriarch wonder why her son was doing absolutely nothing since his big interview. She nagged him to be productive for once. But then it hit him. If his mom decided to fix his attitude, things would get terrifying fast. Gustavo deadpanned his busy schedule, gaming, eating, hitting the toilet, and sleeping. That smart aleck answer was the final straw, instantly triggering his mother's legendary fury. She warned him that shifter instincts are a wild card. If they take the wheel, chaos follows. One slip-up, and he'd be trading his bedroom for a cold, high-security prison cell. She even brought up that local urban legend about a kid who lost it and spent his nights howling at the moon. Self-control is mandatory, but watching the news, Gustavo noted that magic users are the real troublemakers. Mom insisted that self-mastery is the only way to tame the beast within. That's exactly why they hiked those lonely mountains when his powers first flared up. Nature's solitude is the ultimate training ground for learning true restraint. She also threw in a pro tip. Finding a girlfriend would help burn off that excess energy. Because if he doesn't put a leash on his instincts, he might become a public menace. She got curious and asked if he was into guys. Our MC gave a hard no on that one. The thought of him being a shut-in for another month was genuinely starting to worry her. She even suggested he kickstart his plans early, despite his dad's advice to enjoy his final days of freedom. Flashback to the interview results. Our boy didn't just pass, he crushed it. Now, he's staring down the barrel of a brutal 5-week training camp. Glancing at the official offer, the kid nearly had a heart attack from the shock. The starting salary was a cool $45,000 plus a mountain of elite perks. It was an insane deal, the kind of enchanting offer you just don't turn down. Gustavo wanted to brag to both parents, but the secretary reminded him his file only lists an immortal father. Revealing the truth could blow up his parents' marriage, and the secretary didn't sugarcoat the risk. So, for the sake of family peace, he has to keep his mother completely in the dark. Gustavo declared he'd become the MVP of the Ministry of the Interior, but the matriarch just rolled her eyes at his big talk, since he currently looked like a professional couch potato. Still, having that heart-to-heart talk made her feel a little less stressed about his future. In reality, she's beyond relieved that her son isn't turning out to be a complete disaster. If all shifter punks were this grounded, the world would be a much quieter place. Gustavo assured her he's doing great and that he's actually hyped to be a hybrid. In the old days, hybrids were ticking time bombs because they couldn't balance their dual natures. But our boy is a rare breed. He's mastered the mix, sleeping like a log and eating like a garbage disposal. Finally, the Hell Week schedule dropped into his inbox. The chosen ones are already packing their bags and heading to the secret rendezvous point. Our protagonist is standing at the station, ready to board the bus to his new life. From his seat, Gustavo watched the poor souls outside melting in the brutal heat. It was a glaring sign that summer was out for blood this year. Inside the bus, however, it was pure luxury. Perfect AC, heat-shielded glass, and plenty of legroom. Gustavo realized a new skill as he scanned the passengers. He can smell the other hybrids. Beyond just looks, they had these unique auras that he could pick up with his gut instinct. And wouldn't you know it, one of those hybrids was sitting right in his personal space. It was that same pretty boy from the exam center. Listening to the chatter, he noticed people were already busy networking and forming cliques. Making allies early is the golden rule of survival in any manhwa world. His dad had given him the same advice. Sometimes the most random meetings lead to the most loyal brothers. The old man was just proud to see his son finally stepping out as a man. He's also glad the kid can handle city noise. The old man's senses were too sharp for that. Gustavo asked for the details. Turns out the old man was a chronic insomniac because he could hear a pin drop 3 blocks away. Shifters have to domesticate their impulses just to keep their senses from overwhelming them. Dad used to wear industrial earplugs and literally bought a 4-story fortress just to sleep in a soundproofed vault in the middle. So if the kid can sleep through a siren, it means his sensory control is already top tier. Gustavo realized that was a major flex, but for him, it was as natural as breathing, a total hybrid perk. The old man warned him that his new peers would be sensory snowflakes and to tread lightly. Recalling that warning, Gustavo nudged the handsome guy, joking that the universe really wanted them to be besties. But this high-tier extra decided that silence was his best defense. He actually had the nerve to act like a jerk, coldly asking if they had even met before. They had literally been locking eyes for weeks like they were in a K-drama. Gustavo tried to remind him of their previous run-ins, but the guy played the I don't know you card perfectly. Following Dad's make friends advice was getting hard. This ice queen next to him was either a total airhead or a world-class liar. Giving up on the jerk, he turned his attention to a sharp-looking blonde girl nearby. Our hero tried to put on his most polite, neighborly face, but the girl's first words were a call-out. She pegged him as a hybrid instantly. She guessed he grew up sheltered and soft, probably having no clue about the hell they were heading toward. She basically called him an immature brat, which immediately got under our boy's skin. She didn't stop there, mocking his lack of basic observation skills. She explained they are all hypersensitive, which is why everyone is huddled in the dark. His loud talking was like a jackhammer to their ears. Only the low-tier hybrids were making noise because their senses were duller. She ended her lecture by telling this ignorant fool to shut his mouth for everyone's sake. Gustavo's first instinct was to deliver a corrective slap to her head, but he held back, barely. The kicker? She was right. Dad used to call himself Mr. Sensitive back in the day, even with his master-level control. But being a snowflake didn't give her the right to be a total brat. After that, the bus went dead silent. Opening a bag of chips now would basically be a declaration of war against every passenger. But then, a much more dangerous pressure began to build within our hero. It was his stomach, and it was staging a violent protest. A legendary fart was screaming for its freedom. Gustavo decided he was done being polite to these arrogant extras. He decided to send the blonde girl a little parting gift from his digestive tract. She caught the first whiff of his bioweapon. A toxic stench began to fill every corner of the luxury bus. Gagging and nearly passing out, the girl hissed that he was a truly disgusting human being. Gustavo leaned back, finally at peace, knowing he'd delivered some sweet, smelly revenge to her doorstep. Hours after the Great Gas Crisis, they finally pulled into the camp. The recruits began piling out, lugging their gear and breathing in the fresh air. They were in the middle of nowhere, and before Gustavo could check his GPS, someone tapped his shoulder. It was the noisy hybrids from the bus, grinning and asking what kind of biohazard he'd eaten to produce that smell. Gustavo laughed, recognizing them instantly, and admitted he just couldn't hold back the thunder. The green-haired one is Johann, and the redhead is Redhead, because I'm not stressing over more names. Gustavo joked that Redhead looked more like the farting type, which immediately broke the ice and got the group laughing. After a quick catch-up, Redhead realized our MC was completely clueless about the real training. This place wasn't just a camp. It was a high-intensity combat hub. Suddenly, a booming voice barked orders for everyone to fall in and form 5 perfect columns. The atmosphere turned from field trip to boot camp in a heartbeat. Gustavo looked around and saw the scale of the competition, at least 100 hungry youths. He noticed something weird. After a tiny jog, half the prodigies were already wheezing like old men. Our boy couldn't believe these were the elite he was supposed to be worried about. And the plot thickened. The lead instructor was that same bald guy from the written exam. The candle guy and the sweet secretary were also there, looking a lot more intimidating now. The bald instructor announced that they had 30 days to turn these kids into soldiers, but he was already disgusted by their pathetic physical state. Then he barked an order for them to fix their eyes on the distant tree lane. Radiating pure malice, the bald instructor announced a race to the other side. Only the first 15 to cross would matter. A frantic swarm of background characters exploded into motion, desperate to make the cut. Leading the pack were the elite hybrids, moving with supernatural grace, closely followed by the sharp-tongued blonde and the icy silent princess. Gustavo wasn't even breaking a sweat. Honestly, he could hop on one leg and still smoke these rookies. He aimed to coast into 14th place, close enough to pass, but low enough to stay off everyone's radar. He remembered the golden rule: never reveal his shifter blood, or he'd be inviting a world of pain and prejudice. To normal folks, he wouldn't be a hero. He'd be a freakish anomaly. They'd treat him like a ticking time bomb, a walking disaster waiting for an excuse to go off. Calculating every stride, our boy throttled his speed and crossed the line exactly where he planned. To make the act convincing, he doubled over and wheezed, faking a near-death experience for the cameras. Looking at the rest of the pack, these supposed prodigies looked like they had the lung capacity of lifelong chain smokers. The bald man didn't hold back, telling the losers to pack their bags because they were too pathetic to stay. He punctuated the dismissal with a glare that could peel paint off a wall. For the lucky ones who remained, the real nightmare began with a mountain of push-ups. With every grueling rep, they were forced to bark out a humiliating mantra: "I am a total loser." Gustavo thought this would be a breezy corporate retreat, but the vibe shifted into a full-blown military meat grinder. Even the kind girl dropped her mask, looking like a demon from the pits of hell as she loomed over the recruits. The entire squad was shaking, their muscles screaming as they struggled to stay off the dirt. One guy looked like he was vibrating into another dimension. He was one rep away from a total gastrointestinal disaster. Suddenly, the bald man called a halt. He sneered, claiming that in his era, such weakness was unheard of. He labeled them the absolute bottom tier of history. He turned his fire on one hybrid, warning him to zip it, unless he wanted his high-pitched screeching to shatter every eardrum in the facility. In this camp, even your vocal cords are on a leash. Gustavo realized these legendary immortals were mostly just soft. The instructor kept ranting, insisting that back in the day, none of these kids would have survived the orientation. He gave one recruit a choice: pack up and leave, or take a corrective punishment. Fired up, the kid chose the pain. The bald man grinned. It was the exact answer he wanted. A second later, a sickening crack echoed through the yard. Gustavo winced. That was the unmistakable sound of a bone being snapped like a dry twig. Curiosity got the better of him, so he craned his neck to get a peek at the damage. Yep, that poor fool's arm was twisted into a shape that definitely wasn't in the Human Anatomy Handbook. Gustavo watched carefully. For an immortal, a broken bone is just a Tuesday, but it still looked like a nightmare. Instructor Lee laid out the penal code. Broken bones are the currency. Swearing costs 2 points. Loud talking costs 1. An unauthorized brawl? That's a 5-point bone breaker. They'd learn the rest of the price list soon enough. The bald man caught Gustavo looking and asked if he was enjoying the live entertainment. Our hero felt his heart skip a beat. Walking back to the front, Lee reiterated that they were all nothing but soft, privileged weaklings. He ordered them to their feet, declaring that even the winners of the race were barely mediocre. We finally got a name. The bald tyrant is Instructor Lee, and he's the official shepherd of this flock of losers. The kind girl stepped up, explaining they'd be honing their physical limits since stamina is the fuel for their regeneration. Even as greenhorns, they needed to learn to heal on command. To Gustavo, she seemed like the only sane person in this madhouse. Her name is Darren. Honestly, that's a tragedy of a name. She's staying kind girl in my book, and she's the technical instructor. Then Candle Guy stepped forward. His name is Kim, and he greeted them with a chilling promise to kill every last one of them. Classic edgelord dialogue from a secondary character who thinks he's the main villain. Kind girl translated the threat. Instructor Kim would be educating them on the limits of their immortality. Gustavo realized the crazy farmer had already given him a master's degree in that. Lee offered one last exit. Leave now and save everyone the trouble. Gustavo decided to stick it out for a month. He figured once he learned the ropes, it would be easy street, as long as he didn't take a bullet to the brain. The bald man barked for absolute silence. With a twisted grin, he finally welcomed them to their new home, absolute hell. The recruits were funneled into a room, trading their civilian clothes for standard-issue uniforms. Gustavo scanned the dorm. It had all the cozy charm of a set from a low-budget psychological horror flick. Johann was a puddle of sweat and headed straight for the showers. Having him and Redhead around made the nightmare feel a bit more like home. The downside? They were sharing quarters with the arrogant blonde and the freezing silent princess. To make matters worse, Gustavo's bunkmate was a guy who breathed like a steam engine with a broken gasket. He was a greasy, heavy-set dude, a reminder that being immortal doesn't mean you automatically get a six-pack. The room was a melting pot. A foreigner who looked totally lost and a pair of twins who looked like they'd never seen the sun. A truly bizarre cast of characters for this season's drama. Rounding out the group was a girl so generic she'd blend into a white wall. Zero gender segregation here. Gustavo looked around, wondering where a guy was supposed to get changed without an audience. The blonde girl snapped at him not to peek. Gustavo hit her back with an icy "don't flatter yourself," making it clear he wasn't interested. She didn't buy it, already pegging him as a creep. She had no idea she was living with a high-level shifter. The pale twins suggested they set some ground rules to avoid a roommate brawl. Gustavo noted her voice was surprisingly melodic. The silent princess laid down the law. Keep the hygiene outside the room or face a death sentence. The blonde girl was all in on the hygiene or death policy. Even Gustavo's buddies jumped on the bandwagon, leaving our boy as the only one wanting a bit of freedom. It was a unanimous vote against him. He was officially the odd man out in the dorm. The princess emphasized that cleanliness was non-negotiable. Even skipping a toothbrushing was a crime. The group's fanatical devotion to hygiene was starting to make Gustavo very, very uncomfortable. But like it or not, he was stuck in his clean freak asylum for the next 30 days. He decided to play along with the herd. Survival in Hell Camp meant picking his battles wisely. At the mess hall, the announcement dropped. The 100 recruits would be split into 10 tactical teams. Post-lunch, they had to elect a leader to be the face of their group. Gustavo felt the familiar sting of social anxiety. The blonde immediately nominated the silent princess, claiming she was the only one with the right pedigree. The Bear brothers, the twins, grunted their approval. Even his own friends started nodding along like mindless extras. Gustavo couldn't take it. He spoke up, arguing the princess was too cold. A leader needs to actually be approachable, not a human glacier. The blonde sneered, telling him a hybrid's low-blood opinion didn't mean squat. Her sheer arrogance made Gustavo's blood boil. He had a sudden, violent urge to introduce her face to the cafeteria floor. He expected combat drills after lunch, but instead they were issued bootleg equipment, cheap boots and gear that looked like surplus junk. Before they could hit the rack, they were forced into a mind-numbing theory lecture. They were told to pay close attention to a corporate video. The instructor acted like the feature company was a household name. Gustavo was the only one out of the loop, so he nudged Johan for the cliff notes. The company is Hawaii Communications, a name so generic I had to fix it for the recap. Essentially, this job is an elite government contractor gig. They're a private organization backed by the state. They aren't official cops, but they handle all the supernatural dirty work. The instructor started another back in my day, ran about walking on knives. Gustavo was ready to mute the guy's life. The old man's advice for staying sane? Just become a mindless drone and follow orders without questioning. The instructor wrapped up his wisdom, looking at his subordinates with total disdain. Then Kind Girl flickered onto the screen, explaining that their mission was to weaponize the immortals' gifts effectively. That purpose needed to be burned into their brains until it was second nature. Finally, the torture was over for the day. Lights out. After a heavenly shower, Gustavo was ready to pass out. For him, sleeping in a room full of people was a piece of cake. But his hypersensitive roommates were losing it, complaining that the sound of breathing was as loud as a jet engine. Johan actually turned to Gustavo and asked him to stop breathing entirely, or better yet, just go die quietly in the hall. Gustavo remembered his dad's words. It takes years for purebreds to tune out the world. These 23-year-olds were just sensory babies. Curious, Gustavo asked his buddy how he planned to get any shut-eye. The guy revealed his secret technique. He literally knocks himself out. Since he's an immortal, brain damage isn't a long-term concern. Gustavo offered to lend a hand. Well, a grip, and the guy looked at him with a mix of hope and doubt. He tried to warn Gustavo not to squeeze too hard. Last time he was out for 48 hours, but the words came too late. Our hero was already happily strangling his new friend to relieve some stress, leaving Redhead absolutely traumatized. The other roommate watched the scene unfold in horrified silence. Actually, he looked intrigued. He finally found a human-shaped sleeping pill to solve his insomnia. The Redhead was next on the chopping block. He was desperate for a snooze, and his interest sparked a chain reaction. When Gustavo asked who else wanted a ticket to Dreamland, hands shot up like it was a sale. Our boy had a total field day in the dorms that night. He ended up sending every single one of them on a one-way trip to the land of Nod. But two stubborn souls remained to be introduced to Morpheus. And for the uninitiated, Morpheus is the Greek god of dreams, not just a guy in a trench coat. Even the blonde realized our MC isn't just a complete waste of space after all. Payback time for Gustavo. He played hard to get, but the blonde played the roommate card, promising she'd owe him a huge favor if he helped her out. But Gustavo wasn't buying into her little friendship speech for a second. However, right in the middle of shutting her down, a brilliant, slightly devious idea hit him. He decided he would charitably help this girl out with a single, precise strike. He delivered a neck chop with just enough extra flavor to make it count. Since it was a consensual knockout, it felt like pure therapy for our hero's soul. Now, only the silent princess was left standing. Gustavo looked at her and asked, "Who's next?" But the silent princess just turned her back and crawled into her bed like a brick wall. Hey, if she wants to suffer, that's on her. Our protagonist needs his beauty sleep too. Everyone slept like a log that night, except for one girl who was way too proud to admit she was dying for a nap. Gustavo realized that bedtime had officially become the high point of his miserable day. The next morning, the bald instructor was back to making their lives a living hell. Recruits were running laps, gasping for air and regretting every life choice that led them here. In the kind instructor's class, she was drilling it into their heads that even as immortals, they aren't invincible. Gustavo's sparring partner was talking big, bragging about his supposed street cred. He actually deluded himself into thinking he could take our boy down. He charged in like a raging bull, intending to smash Gustavo into the pavement. But Gustavo didn't even blink. He met the guy's face with a generous fist and a side of pure power, leaving his tough guy partner snoring on the floor in record time. The instructor actually looked impressed by the efficiency of the beatdown. Finally, it was time for the knife run, a classic sadistic rite of passage for immortals. The instructor with the spark plug head barked the order to move. Half the recruits were literally vibrating with fear. Even Gustavo was caught off guard. These blades were only 2 centimeters. Back home, he was running over spikes triple that size for breakfast. A week flew by, and another bedtime showdown arrived. Gustavo was curious if the silent princess would keep up her Ice Queen routine. He loved her rejections because he knew she was secretly suffering from massive insomnia. But the second he walked into the dorm, he felt a strange tension in the air, like a storm was brewing. Gustavo asked Johan what the vibe was. Johan whispered that a major incident went down last night. Apparently, a sleep-deprived team leader snapped and got into a brutal brawl with other cranky, exhausted recruits. That explained why a group of thugs was currently staring a hole through them. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed, heading straight for their room. The silent princess told the group to stay back. She wanted to handle this mess herself. A pack of irritated, sleep-deprived recruits blocked the way. The room turned into a battlefield of intense glares. The leader of the thugs stepped forward, and he was looking for one specific person, our MC. Gustavo didn't hide, stepping up to see what this extra wanted with him. As they locked eyes in a tense standoff, Gustavo asked the guy what his deal was. The tough guy suddenly struggled to find his words, his face turning an interesting shade of red. Visibly dying of embarrassment, the thug blurted out that he also wanted to sleep with Gustavo. That phrasing hit our boy like a freight train of confusion. Gustavo immediately shut it down, declaring his love for women. The thug panicked, clarifying he just wanted a peaceful night of sleep. Nothing weird. He felt like he was on death's door. His whole team was losing their minds from lack of sleep and begged for a knockout session. Gustavo asked how the word got out, and the guy said the rumors were spreading like a wildfire. And surprise, surprise, Johan the Gossip King was the one who framed the sleep request in the most suggestive way possible. Well, that certainly explains the awkward tension. When asked if he could handle the extra work, Gustavo shrugged. It only takes a second to put someone out. That night, he performed sleep therapy for the entirety of Team 1. The next morning, the tattooed leader was acting like Gustavo's new best friend. He kept praising Gustavo's hand skills for making him feel so relaxed. Gustavo told him to zip it before people started getting the wrong idea. During training, the suffering continued under the bald instructor's watchful eye, but then he spotted an anomaly. An overweight immortal? In his hardcore era, that would have been a crime against nature. Gustavo noticed the chubby guy was hit by a massive wall of fatigue. The poor guy had to bail on a run to lose his lunch on the sidelines. Gustavo checked on him, but the chubby guy just wheezed for Gustavo to keep going without him. He looked totally defeated, convinced he'd never see the finish line. Gustavo hauled him up, telling him that if he was going to quit this easily, he shouldn't have shown up at all. He gave him his word. They were both crossing that line together, no matter what. As they pushed forward, Gustavo kept the motivational speech going so the guy wouldn't collapse. The bald instructor, being a natural-born hater, taunted them, asking if they were holding hands like a couple. When they finally limped across, the instructor called time and slapped them both with a 5-point penalty. The chubby guy panicked at the thought of the punishment, but Gustavo told him to chill out. Points didn't matter to our hero, but the chubby guy was still shaking like a leaf. He asked why Gustavo would risk his own score for a stranger, a question Gustavo thought was totally brain-dead. To him, camaraderie is the foundation. Without looking out for your own, you're just a mindless drone. He remembered being saved as a kid by someone who didn't ask for a reason either. Later, in the locker room, Johan asked why Gustavo wasn't helping the silent princess sleep. Gustavo sighed, saying the idiot keeps rejecting the offer. Johan mused about how special those two were, but Gustavo noticed the redhead looking like his dog died. He leaned in and whispered to Johan, asking what was up with Mr. Depressed. Apparently, some high-stakes drama went down at the convenience store. The blonde girl, Mio, dropped her wallet, and the redhead saw his chance. He tried to be a gentleman and return it, joking about finally knowing her name. But he got hit with a cold-blooded rejection. The blonde wasn't interested in his kindness or his face. That's why the redhead was currently moping in the corner of his own misery. Gustavo tried to tell him there are plenty of fish in the sea, but it was no use. The poor guy was already head over heels in love, which just left our MC even more confused by human emotions. Back at the dorm, the conversation about Mio continued as Gustavo fished for more intel. But as they reached their door, our protagonist saw a sight that made him stop in his tracks. The hallway was packed with recruits, lined up like they were waiting for the latest iPhone. They were all hunting for the legendary bus farter, who could grant them the sweet release of sleep. They were practically begging on their knees because they were one sleepless night away from a total mental breakdown. Gustavo and the redhead shot a death glare at the culprit, Johann the Gossip King. Johann tried to play it off, claiming he was just promoting his friend's amazing talents. Faced with a literal army of recruits, Gustavo wondered how his knuckles were going to hold up. This mess was going to cost him at least an hour of his own rest. Suddenly, our hero's nights became more packed than a celebrity schedule. It was a female recruit's turn. Gustavo hit her with his signature cheesy line, "Dream of me." She gave him a look of pure, "Is this guy serious?" Gustavo chuckled, told her to dream of someone hotter, and then, lights out. He finally staggered back into his own room, exhausted from his charity work. But there was still one person there who held his interest. The silent princess was looking like a total zombie from exhaustion. Yet she was still stubbornly refusing to accept Gustavo's help. At this point, Gustavo has knocked out so many people he could probably do it with his eyes closed. He even set up a system where recruits have to come to him to save his energy. The instructors just turned a blind eye. As long as the recruits were rested and ready for more torture, they didn't care how they got to sleep. He'd evolved into a campus legend. The sleeping pill, the neck chopper, the Sandman. Until he got stuck with the most cursed nickname of all, Neckcoin. Our MC wasn't exactly vibing with the name, but the other recruits were treating him like a VIP savior. Even that outcast redhead, the long-haired dude who was his first patient, keeps trying to bribe him with snacks. At long last, this grueling phase of the boot camp is finally hitting the finish line. The nightmare fuel monsters invading Earth have an official name, Invaders. It's been 2 decades since the first breach. Instructor Lee is breaking down the bestiary, ranking these freaks by their threat level. The numbering system tracks their appearance chronologically. Each recruit's tablet is packed with intel. Even the trash mobs can easily end an immortal's life. And then there are the boss-level invaders, creatures you should run from the moment you see them. These high-tier threats are so infamous they actually have individual names. He introduced the Blue Knight, a monster that deleted 500 elite soldiers the second it stepped onto our soil. As the lecture drones on, Gustavo starts piecing together the big picture. This company isn't just a job, it's a frontline defense. The world looks peaceful, but the shadow of a portal opening is always looming. A specialized strike force is mandatory, and that's the real reason Hawaii Communications pulls the strings. Well, that massive salary definitely comes with hazard pay written all over it. The truth just makes our hero even more hyped. Forget the Marines. He's basically joining a squad of supernatural hunters. Now he's just wondering why his old man pushed him toward such a lethal career. The class then shifted gears into some heavy theory. They started exploring tactical artifacts. The kind instructor showcased a device that manually pumps blood to keep them conscious during trauma. Another gadget acts like a biological overclock, sharpening senses and boosting physical stats to the limit. Gustavo actually sat up and started paying attention to this part of the gear breakdown. The instructor dropped a warning. These boosts are highly addictive and come with nasty permanent side effects. Seeing the mountain of samples she brought out, Gustavo realized that the immortal world must be crawling with artifact junkies. Over in Instructor Kim's class, the mental conditioning continues. Slowly but surely, Gustavo's influence started changing the dorm. The strong were finally helping the weak. Some recruits even managed to master their own senses, finally drifting off without needing the Neckcoin special. The daily grind is finally flowing like a well-oiled machine. Even the chubby guy is keeping pace now. The final day of training finally arrived. Miraculously, despite the brutal penalties, everyone survived. With a rare grin, Lee gave them a thumbs up. They are now official operatives of Hawaii Communications. Cue the victory cheers. This is the big win everyone was bleeding for. Instructor Kim stepped up to drop the final rankings, which would determine their permanent squads. The top 3 A-listers get a fat bonus. And if it's cold hard cash, our boy is ready to secure the bag. Time to announce the bronze medalist. Gustavo's heart is doing backflips. 3rd place goes to some random background character. Even our MC can't put a name to the face. Instructor Lee noted this guy's placement would be tricky, but the extra made it clear. He wants in on the security division. The instructor just nodded, promising a decision would be made soon. Now for the silver medal, 2nd place. It's the Silent Princess. Honestly, nobody in the room was surprised by that. She's got that elite main character DNA running through her veins. Gustavo watches her closely, still not fully grasping the hype behind her lineage. Talking it over with his crew, Johann is absolutely floored that Gustavo is this out of the loop. The Silent Princess is from a legendary pure-blood clan. Gustavo thought she was just a noble, but the redhead explained it's all about the genetics. The pure ones are built different, superior stats, faster healing, the whole package. And her family has some of the highest purity ratings in the entire organization. Despite her being a total jerk, Gustavo has to respect her grind. The girl is undeniably elite. But wait, look at the stage. Since the princess took second, the redhead actually started deluding himself into thinking he took the top spot. Gustavo and Johann just looked at him with pure pity. The man is living in a fantasy world. Now, for the number one rank. Gustavo already has a feeling about who's taking the crown. Defying the odds, first place goes to the blonde girl. Great. He still can't stand her. That girl wouldn't win a Miss Congeniality contest, even if she was the only one entered. But he has to give credit where it's due. She's a tactical genius who gamed the system for every possible point. She's a total mercenary. She won't lift a finger to help unless there's something in it for her. That's why Gustavo isn't a fan. Staring at the top three, Gustavo wondered if they'd be rivals or allies down the road. But then, he realized he still didn't even know the third guy's name anyway. The recruits are officially off the clock until tomorrow afternoon. Gustavo suggested a blowout party, and while they were vibing, an instructor pulled him aside for a private chat later. His friends immediately started sniffing around for the juicy details. Suddenly, another instructor walked up and handed our boy their personal digits. This sent his buddies into a total frenzy, dying to know why the brass was so interested in him. To Gustavo, it's a clear-cut case of corporate scouting. The instructors want to recruit him for their specific units. Boot camp wasn't just about passing. It was a showcase. Even the redhead delinquent is acting humble now, thanking Gustavo for finally giving him a full night's sleep. A cute recruit even swapped numbers with him, suggesting a study date. Suddenly, the extras have become his loyal comrades, treating him with some serious respect. It's a far cry from what Gustavo expected, but looking at the results, our boy realized he'd accidentally conquered the whole camp. Back at the dorm, Johann was acting like a jealous girlfriend, asking what took him so long. Gustavo joked that a superstar's work is never done. He had to sign autographs for his adoring fans. While the room was buzzing, a sudden, heavy aura demanded everyone's attention. A high-ranking official in a sharp suit marched into the room. Gustavo noticed everyone was caught off guard, but he was stunned he didn't sense the guy sooner. This man was a master of stealth. The suit was just the vanguard, clearing the path for a true heavyweight. A deep voice rumbled, acknowledging that this year's crop actually had some potential. The old man's name is, wow, another weird one. Let's go with Mufasa. He's the big boss, the CEO himself. Realizing they were in the presence of royalty, the recruits snapped into a crisp military salute. Gustavo did a quick mental search. Mufasa is a first-gen legend, a veteran immortal, and one of the top 10 powerhouses on the planet. The boss then asked if they actually enjoyed the torture. When they all lied and said yes, he laughed and called them out. Nobody likes getting beat up. Hacking your own body apart just to test your healing factor is pure insanity. But Mufasa reminded them that this specific brand of insanity is what keeps them alive in the field. He singled out the Silent Prince, who stood up like he was on a spring. The CEO gave the boy a rare nod of approval for his performance. He then turned to the blonde girl. She stood up fast as the CEO mentioned he had huge plans for her. But our hero was just wondering why a billionaire CEO was hanging out in a dusty dorm. Maybe being a CEO is a low-effort job. And then, the boss called out Gustavo's name. That was definitely not on the script. Mufasa acknowledged his hybrid status and, shockingly, told him he did a damn good job. He started asking personal questions, his age, his relationship status, as if he was sizing him up for something more than a job. He gave a cryptic see you around and made his grand exit. But before leaving, he announced he'd left a little parting gift for the whole dorm. Johann was bugging out, asking if Gustavo was the CEO's secret son, but Gustavo swore he'd never seen the old man. They joked about the CEO's preferences until someone reminded them he actually has a daughter. Tucked away in the dorm was the mystery gift. The instructor told them they were lucky and to use it sparingly. It looked like high-end booze. The redhead tried one last time to charm the blonde, but got hit with the ultimate cold shoulder yet again. Gustavo and Johann just watched in awe. The guy's persistence in the face of brutal rejection was almost heroic. The chubby guy, driven by hunger, cracked open the gift and realized it wasn't alcohol at all. It was a high-purity substance cocktail, the ultimate sleep aid that immortals crave. The box had 10 bottles, valued a staggering 3,000,000 each. Suddenly, the sound of a can hitting the floor rang out. Everyone turned to look as the empty can rolled across the tile. The Silent Prince had downed the entire 3,000,001 drink in one go. He glared at Gustavo, muttered a parting insult, and made our boy feel the second-hand embarrassment. Seconds later, the Silent Prince was out cold, proof that the CEO's gift was the real deal. As the guys started vibing, the blonde girl actually walked up to Gustavo and dropped a sincere thank you for everything. While the chaos was unfolding, Gustavo tried to keep his poker face on. But the real plot twist happened when the girl stealthily tucked a secret note into his palm. She whispered that it was top secret, leaving the redhead practically vibrating with jealousy. Feeling like the main character of a hit K-drama, Gustavo soaked in the glory, especially since he'd already warned Redhead he was way out of her league. Redhead clearly doesn't have a mirror at home. Johan even joked that both his teammates were a total disaster in the looks department. The note was a chilling heads-up. The blonde knew the CEO had a habit of hand-picking talent personally, a move that could either rocket him to the top or turn his life into a literal nightmare. She told him to watch his back. Gustavo was genuinely puzzled. How did a rookie like her get her hands on such high-level intel? It's starting to look like she's packing more secrets than a final boss. Gustavo told his buddy the note was nothing special, but he kept it hidden. After downing the premium potion, the entire room finally surrendered to a deep, coma-like sleep. The sun rose on the first official day of their high-stakes corporate lives. Gustavo found himself assigned to the notorious External Security Team 3. A man was already lurking there. Our hero figured this must be the guy in charge. But as soon as another staffer laid eyes on him, Gustavo heard the pure, unadulterated disappointment in his voice. The guy had eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep since the last century. Grabbing the phone, he barked out a complaint, asking if this was a prank because they'd just dumped a fresh rookie in his lap. He'd specifically put in an order for a grizzled veteran with years of field experience. Another person in the office just waved our boy over to his seat. It was a woman with hair as fiery and vibrant as a sunset. She tried to get a game plan out of the team leader, but the guy was totally drawing a blank. Seeing the mess, she decided she'd take it upon herself to whip Gustavo into shape. He, on the other hand, was feeling the crushing weight of the awkward atmosphere. Beckoning him over, she prepared to dump a mountain of responsibilities on the poor guy. She shoved a list of every single employee in the company at him. He had to memorize every name by sunrise and then incinerate the evidence. She pointed out his new home, a desk with 2 phones, one for high-level security alerts and one for boring business calls. After a few more survival tips, Gustavo gave a sharp nod, acting like he had it all under control. Once the tour was over, the redhead woman vanished back into her mysterious investigation work. And so began our boy's office life, which was surprisingly mind-numbing. By the time the clock ran out, he was more than ready to drown his boredom in a few stiff drinks. Hanging out with his crew later, he admitted he had some serious questions about the new gig. He asked what the higher-ups were like and was shocked to hear they weren't total monsters. Since Johan is a professional gossip monger, he was already leaking top-tier info like a broken faucet. Apparently, Mufasa had personally pulled the strings to put our protagonist in that specific unit. External Security Team 3 is the elite of the elite. They're the direct arm of HQ for dangerous field ops. It sounds like a total meat grinder of a job where only the most cracked individuals survive. They've even earned a dark nickname, the Rookie Graveyard. The team leader is known as the Blender because of how he shreds the spirits of newcomers. On top of that, every other department is dying to poach them because their skills are off the charts. Now, let's talk about the fiery redhead woman. She's a superhuman born from high-risk government drug experiments. In a desperate bid to catch up to immortals, humans developed chemicals to force evolve powers, the dark fruit of decades of secret testing. But the details are buried deep. Nobody knows the body count of those trials. She's nicknamed the Knife because she carves rookies up without a shred of pity. And wouldn't you know it, this legendary woman was actually lurking in the shadows, eavesdropping on their whole chat. She heard the exact moment our hero joked that they sounded like the Avengers because of their edgy code names. That was the moment Gustavo's friends realized they were playing with fire. A sudden chill raced down our boy's spine as she stepped out of the dark. The redhead reminded him that he was supposed to be memorizing names, not dig up everyone's dirty laundry. With that terrifying warning, she vanished again. The waiter felt so bad for the doomed rookie that he slid him a complimentary snack on the house. Staring at those pity peanuts, Gustavo realized he was officially cooked. Trying to stop the spiral, he told himself to treat the job like a fantasy world quest just to stay sane. Right then, the phone rang, snapping him back to reality. Our hero tried to sound professional, but he butchered the caller's name and got an immediate verbal beatdown from the redhead. The sleep-deprived guy and the team leader were already convinced their new rookie was a total dunce. He's basically a glorified secretary for now, but he's using his downtime to scout the other divisions. Since he's already famous as Nekkoen, the team leader, Lee, who is a high-ranking pureblood, keeps a close eye on him. Lee isn't a hater when it comes to hybrids. He's just brutally honest and has zero filter. He's also a combat god, easily one of the most dangerous men in the entire building. When things get physical, nobody wants to be on the receiving end of his fists. Also, he swears like a sailor. Then there's Panda, the guy with the permanent dark circles who is also a hybrid. He's useless with a gun or his fists, but he's a straight-up Mozart when it comes to data and tech. Knowing he'd die in a fair fight, he turned himself into a master strategist. Our protagonist can't figure out where all that brain power comes from, but he's definitely obsessed with anime. Finally, Ms. Kim, one of the rare humans who survived elite training to stand among monsters. She's the pinnacle of human potential and one of the most respected figures in the company. She's got the personality of a frozen glacier, 0 emotions, 100 lethality. Only the absolute best get into external security, and Gustavo knows these people are titans, even if their personalities are absolute garbage. A week into the job, things finally started moving. Our protagonist team marched into the high-tech surveillance hub. Looks like they have some official business to settle. Our boy did his best to introduce himself to the other division staff. Panda noticed some people were missing and learned they were out on a live field op. Turns out a testing session is in progress, and the current lab rat is none other than the Silent Princess. She was inside a gravity chamber powered by top-tier portal tech. Panda already knew the specs, but a side character decided to explain the science to our hero anyway. In that room, they can crank the gravity up to 9 times Earth's norm. They force rookies to run and do push-ups until they break. It's the standard hazing, but Panda looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. The guy with glasses bragged that his rookie could handle 5 times the normal weight. As the dial turned, the poor girl started to visibly crumble under the pressure. Gustavo had to bite his tongue to keep from laughing out loud. The redhead woman caught him instantly and asked if he found her suffering amusing. The gravity became so crushing that the girl eventually blacked out and collapsed. Machine off. Panda told our protagonist he better keep that smug grin on his face when it's his turn. The man in the suit suggested that Gustavo should have been on his team instead of the Misfit Squad. But now, it was time to see what our little monster was actually made of. Once they were alone, they wondered if they were being too cruel, but the suit reminded them that the field doesn't show mercy. King added that she'd rather have an obedient pawn than a dead body to carry. Panda worried the rookie might hold a grudge, but if he wants to survive this team, he has to be a cut above the rest. Honestly, making him quit now would be a mercy for everyone, because if he stays, he might develop that immortal sadism where they lose touch with their humanity and become out-of-control monsters. If he flops this test, he's getting shipped off to a safe desk job for hybrids. Even Lee can't figure out what Mufasa was thinking when he assigned this kid to them. Suddenly, the supervisor spoke up. The kid was actually doing surprisingly well. The dial was already hitting level 4. To their shock, the girl was actually holding her own, but to Lee, this was just baseline performance. He's looking for a true freak of nature with real potential. Right then, he realized the protagonist wasn't even breaking a sweat. The technician confirmed the impossible. Our boy was still moving with total ease. The gravity kept climbing higher and higher until it hit a bone-crushing 8x multiplier. This display left Gustavo's entire elite team standing there in absolute silence. The operator looked over, asking if he should keep pushing the limit. As the dial finally slammed into the 10x mark, this forced Lee to swallow his pride and eat his words. He was witnessing a literal freak of nature. Inside that pressure cooker, Gustavo just kept grinding like it was nothing. He flashed back to how they'd been treating him since day one, looking down on him like trash and barking orders over every tiny mistake. It's high time he showed them he's not just some random extra, even if he's still fuzzy on what this team actually does. As the weight of the air intensified, Gustavo wondered just how far they'd crank the settings. This kind of pressure would pancake any normal immortal. That's exactly why the Silent Princess folded. If it were any of his other rookie buddies in here, they'd have blacked out in a heartbeat. He wasn't sure how long he had to keep up this flex, since his original plan was just to be a tiny bit better than the other girl. But he tossed that humble act out the window. It was time to show them his true, monstrous potential. To check if his brain hadn't turned to mush, they blared a question. Quick, what's 8 times 9? The Silent Princess didn't even survive long enough to hear the question, but our boy barked out the answer instantly. Since his file bragged about his IQ, they turned up the heat. What's 12 times 22? Once again, the kid nailed it without missing a beat. Keen wondered if he was in some kind of trance, but Panda noted that while top-tier drugs can sharpen the mind, they cost a fortune. Lee insisted on a full drug sweep afterward to see if the kid was juicing on performance enhancers. The real kicker? If the test comes back clean, Lee's going to have no idea how to handle this monster. Finally, the torture session ended, and, shockingly, Gustavo actually looked like he enjoyed the ride. He felt light as a feather. Even though it was just a few minutes of training, he felt a massive power surge. Being a hybrid of two peak beings, chasing that kind of high is second nature to him. Finally, the boy stepped out, and Kim offered him a rare word of praise, acting way more human than her usual icy self. The sudden shift in energy was so weird that Gustavo didn't even know how to process it. Lee barked at him to stop daydreaming. If he was done playing around, he needed to get his butt back to the office. Now that he knew the kid was a gem, Lee wanted a deep dive into the records of every single rookie. This started to bug Gustavo. He really only wanted to stay one step ahead of the Silent Princess, not become a lab rat. Before he could vanish, the technician called out to our hero. He introduced himself as the head of the machinery department and told Gustavo he was always welcome to drop by on his off days. But Lee, looking visibly annoyed, just wanted to get his hands on that rookie data. Our boy is feeling a massive confidence boost because a staffer was actually nice to him. On the way back, Kim snapped that she didn't like his tone during introductions. This isn't a summer camp. He's on the clock. In that moment, Gustavo realized that despite his big flex, the office hierarchy hadn't changed a bit. King warned him he'd better keep up the pace. But our boy chose to see it as a tough love pep talk. He's genuinely looking forward to earning a seat at the table with these high-level colleagues. Panda checked his watch. No more playing around. It was time to dive back into the corporate grind. A massive stack of technical manuals was slammed down in front of our boy. His new mission: memorize every single page. Once again, Gustavo realized his life was still a series of chores. According to Panda, these books held the secrets of invader biology, potion recipes, and the base's blueprints. The rookie is expected to know every word by heart. Gustavo figured he'd need months, but they only gave him a measly 4 days to master it all. Completely floored, Gustavo asked why he even needed to memorize this junk. Right then, Lee strolled in and saw the look of despair on the kid's face. He explained that this info is the difference between life and death. One wrong potion, and he's invader food. If he can't fix the machines in the field, he's useless. That's the cold reality of the job. 4 days is a joke, but Kim claimed she only needed 3. Panda took 1, and the CEO did it in 2. The deadline is set. In 4 days, the interrogation begins. For every right answer, he earns a single hour in the elite training center. Lee offered him an easy out if he wanted to quit, but our protagonist just stared him down in silence. He accepted the challenge. Suddenly, everyone in the room started having some seriously high expectations for the kid. Meanwhile, the gravity technician was still crunching the numbers from a test. It turns out he found something mind-blowing and had to share it with Lee. He had to repeat it 12 times. This kid is the ultimate recruit. Lee had to grudgingly admit that the rookie's physique was on a whole different level. The tech was fascinated. A hybrid this specialized is a 1 in a million find. Immortals rarely have bodies this tough. He even joked that if Lee didn't want him, His department would take him in a heartbeat. But Lee, being his usual rude self, shut that down fast. The technician wondered if Lee would finally train the kid personally. It looks like the blender is finally starting up. The probation period is the ultimate sink or swim test to see if these rookies can handle the heat and master their new roles. Our boy is in for a world of learning. Kim fired the first shot. What's the secret sauce in bulletproof and blade-resistant tactical gear? Gustavo answered that it's a high-tech fiber blend of reinforced leather and Kevlar. Lee sneered that the answer was too shallow. Our boy doubled down, explaining it's tougher than diamond, absorbs massive impact, and acts as a climate control shield. The team leader then threw a curveball about subject number 64. That sent a surge of panic through Gustavo. He had no clue what that was. After a desperate mental scramble, he gambled on the wheel night. Lee asked if he was sure. It was a total shot in the dark. But our boy had to commit to the bit. Lee called him a brainless moron, barking that he was wrong, and that an incompetent loser shouldn't sound so confident while being so incredibly wrong. That was just the tip of the iceberg. They grilled him with 10 questions daily, and our boy was failing at least 3 every time. He decided he needed to prioritize his physical stats first. Our hero headed to the gym to level up his strength and bumped into the kind instructor. She's been keeping an eye on him and knows he's been grinding like a madman lately. Our boy said he's just giving it his all, though he conveniently left out that his training was actually a penalty for failing his tests. At the Pain Tolerance Center, he faced off with the candlehead instructor again. Gustavo was there to absorb every bit of survival knowledge possible. The instructor was honestly shocked the kid hadn't kicked the bucket yet. In every other training simulation, Gustavo was absolutely crushing it. His control over his senses was becoming surgical. Even a high-level holographic combatants couldn't keep up with him, and like a moth to a flame, he kept returning to that gravity machine. Gustavo claimed he just needed a stretch, but the operator saw through it. The kid was becoming a training addict. When he finally slumped back to his desk, something caught his eye. A mysterious folder was waiting for him, and Panda was watching him with a smug, satisfied grin. Gustavo realized his reward was just another mountain of data to memorize. By the time he dragged himself home, he was a walking zombie. His mom had dinner waiting, but his dad was missing, apparently off on another mysterious business trip. It's been a full month since he'd seen his old man, and the kid had a million questions about the family business. The problem is, he can't say a word about his work due to strict NDAs and regular polygraph tests at the office. So, he decided to vent to his mom using hypothetical office drama. He complained that his bosses were working him to the bone, and the matriarch got worried they were taking advantage of him. Gustavo clarified it wasn't that. It's just that every task feels like a life or death responsibility. Mom smiled and told him that bosses only pile work on the people they truly trust. But if the heat is too much, she suggests he just pack it up and quit. Poor Gustavo. He instantly regretted opening his mouth and venting to her. The matriarch asked if he was just chasing a paycheck, but our boy insisted there are much cooler perks to the job. Deep down, this is the only path that gets him within striking distance of his personal ambitions. And that's exactly why giving up isn't in his vocabulary. The grind reset the next day. More evaluations, more soul-crushing training sessions. 2 weeks vanished in a flash. By now, our MC had basically downloaded every required manual into his brain, reaching a point where he was literally out of things to study. So, out of pure boredom, he went back to double-check those technical guides. He mapped out the company hierarchy. External security is the tip of the spear, handling dispatches. High-intensity emergencies like black hole events. And even counterterrorism, though security team 2 usually calls dibs on that. They also act as the ultimate backup when other units find themselves in over their heads. Most squads are packed with purebloods, but his specific team is a weird mix of 1 human and 2 hybrids. Slumping in his office chair, Gustavo wondered if corporate life would always be this sluggish, deciding it was time to hit the gym instead. While wandering the corridors, our boy caught the sound of a very familiar, very loud voice. It was his boss having a chat with the blonde girl. Lee spotted the intern immediately. In fact, he's already upgraded our protagonist's name to his favorite term of endearment, dumbass. Lee started peppering him with questions, wondering if our boy was some kind of schoolyard loser back in the day. After hearing the rumors the other recruits were spreading, Lee had his suspicions. But Gustavo stood his ground, assuring him he was never at the bottom of the food chain. Lee demanded to know why. Our boy dropped a truth bomb. He was the one at the top, keeping the losers in line so they wouldn't cause trouble. As the tension spiked, every background character on the floor stopped what they were doing to watch. The air between the two turned electric as they locked eyes in a fierce stare-down. Lee finally realized the intern was likely the school boss who ruled his campus. He wanted to know if that translated to real-world combat experience. Well, there's only one way to find out. It's time for a little live-action practice. The entire room, down to the last extra, was floored by the invitation to spar. Since our hero was already vibrating with stress, he didn't blink before accepting that lovely offer. Lee did a double take, wanted to make sure the rookie actually had the guts to say yes. Flashing a predator's grin at the nearby staff, he announced that since nobody looked busy, they'd all be acting as the cheering section. The blonde girl watched from the sidelines, convinced the protagonist had a death wish. Lee told our boy to meet him in the ring after lunch, warning him to keep his meal light if he wanted to keep it down. He even tried to pawn the rookie off on the blonde girl for some last-minute tips, but she called it a total waste of breath. One quick reminder that he's the guy grading her probation changed her tune real fast. She begrudgingly agreed to help. Our MC can't wrap his head around this plot twist, actually getting mentored by this girl. She warned him that there's no room for cold feet now that the challenge is public. Gustavo just smirked, assuring her that running away isn't a move in his playbook. The clock hit 2:55 p.m. The blonde girl was dying to know why he'd intentionally poke the bear and provoke a man like Lee. Gustavo played it cool, saying he's just following orders like a good soldier. She wanted to know if he was truly ready to throw down. Gustavo knew his boss was itching to use him as a punching bag. But to her, it looked like our hero was just acting out because the office stress had finally broken his brain. The reality? Gustavo is hungry for this. He wants to use this beatdown to test his own limits. Because the man standing across from him is legendary for being the baddest dude in the entire building. Standing by the ring, Lee asked if the kid needed a stretch. Gustavo told him he'd already handled his warm-up outside. Kim gave the rookie a don't die look while the blonde girl just told the protagonist to focus on surviving the next few minutes. The bell rang, and Lee gave the generous offer for the rookie to take the first shot. Our boy went into total focus mode, lunging forward with explosive speed toward his target. Gustavo decided to test the waters first, holding back a fraction of his power. But his opening strikes hit nothing but air. The man moved like a ghost, dodging with zero effort. Lee taunted him, saying he'd never land a scratch with that kind of amateur movement. That jab to his pride made Gustavo narrow his eyes and concentrate even harder. He's convinced he only needs one clean opening to change the game. He intentionally left his guard open on one side, a classic bait to lure the predator in. Lee took the bait instantly, closing the distance in a blur. He fell right into the trap. Gustavo was already coiled and ready for the perfect counter. A thunderous impact echoed through the gym, followed by the sickening sound of snapping bone. But it wasn't Lee. Gustavo took the hit, and his arm was twisted into a shape it definitely wasn't meant to be. He couldn't even process what hit him. His vision blurred as his brain rattled inside his skull. It had been ages since the world felt this tilted, not knowing which way was up or where the floor went. The first time he felt this level of pain was during those hell sessions with his mother. She was a heavy hitter who always told him to snap out of it, because the real pain hadn't even started yet. Back then, our boy was just 15, getting a brutal life lesson for being a smart mouth. This is officially the first time someone other than his mom has handed him his own teeth. Lee looked down, asking if the rookie had enough. Apparently, the party was losing its spark. Gustavo was baffled. How was he the only one broken if they both landed hits? But the reality was cold. His arm had been snatched and snapped before he could even blink, and before he could recover. A brutal elbow strike followed. It was a masterpiece of speed and precision. Even with his shifter regeneration, Gustavo wasn't sure he could even touch this guy. Lee asked if he'd bruised the kid's ego. Apparently, today's rookies are all talk and too much pride. Gustavo let out a long, heavy sigh. This is the ultimate clash, a veteran immortal versus a raw shifter. He'd walked in thinking victory was a given, but his own arrogance had blinded him. Ignoring the pain, our boy reset his stance and prepared for round two. His mind is sharp now, and he's going to keep the pressure on. Lee looked genuinely hyped by the kid's stubbornness. Time to dial up the violence just a bit more. The crowd of employees watched on, completely mesmerized by the lopsided battle. Our boy unleashed a relentless barrage of punches and kicks. A few onlookers realized the kid actually had skills, but Lee was clearly just playing with his food, dodging the flurry without even breaking a stride. Gustavo realized this was a mental war. He had to stay frosty and keep his eyes on the prize. Lee casually asked him what his real motive was for joining the company. If he thinks it's just about the money, Gustavo is going to let that slide and keep his mouth shut. Total focus. That's the only way he survives this. Lee just shook his head, calling the kid a total disappointment. Then, he pulled a disappearing act right in front of Gustavo's eyes. Gustavo realized his opponent was perfectly masking his presence, becoming a phantom. He had to overclock his senses immediately, or this was going to end in a hospital bed. Because of that split-second reaction, our boy narrowly evaded a devastating blow, leaving Lee actually looking impressed for once. Quickly, Gustavo scrambled to put some distance between them. Against that kind of speed, getting close felt like a suicide mission. He couldn't fathom how Lee was outpacing him. As a shifter, he was supposed to be the apex predator in the speed department. That's when it clicked. Every rule has its breaking point. Our hero only knows the basics, while he's facing an immortal with decades of blood and sweat behind him. Lee is a master of refined, lethal technique. But our protagonist's pride is on the line, and he's ready to burn his last fuse to snatch a win. Lee, the old man, is still digging for the truth. He wants to know why a kid like him is here, and if he's actually got the heart of a hero. Lee snatched Gustavo's arm like a toy, mocking him by asking if his only goal was to use his looks to pick up girls. He scoffed, telling him that if he just wanted to be a pretty face, he should have auditioned to be a K-pop idol instead. That was the last straw. Gustavo was absolutely fuming, dying to shut Lee's smart mouth with a heavy-duty fist. Our boy's true conviction is to follow his passion and become the legend he's always dreamed of. But in a blur, Lee vanished again, shifting gears and moving with even more terrifying speed. Slash! Something sharp just grazed our hero's face. The logical move is to retreat and reset, but instead of backing off like a coward, he lunged forward and managed to lock Lee into a death grip, clenching it firmly with both hands. Now Gustavo is the one holding the mic. He asked why a cranky, whiny fossil like Lee was still wasting space in this company. Lee shot back a glare, reminding the brat that he's the one who calls the shots and asks the questions here. But our boy just squeezed tighter, snapping a few of the old man's ribs, a move that sent Lee's irritation levels through the roof. That's Gustavo's trump card. When it comes to raw, brute strength, he's the undisputed king. He decided right then and there to turn the old man into a human panini. But just as he was about to apply the finishing pressure, something eerie shifted in the air, making every spectator hold their breath. In the blink of an eye, Gustavo hit the deck hard, while Lee stood over him, watching like a hawk. One onlooker was floored that Lee actually had to pull out that technique on a mere rookie, noting that any normal guy would have been turned into mincemeat. Another realized that this year's batch of recruits isn't just lucky. They're straight-up monsters in the making. This beatdown is a Team 3 rite of passage. They love indoctrinating newbies by shattering their massive egos. Even so, Lee didn't walk away unscathed. He's got a broken arm and a few cracked ribs to show for it. He barked in order to drag the kid to the med bay, predicting he'd be dreaming for the next several hours. The blonde girl stepped up to play nurse, but only because she's obsessed with getting a perfect score on her probation report. Kim, ever the analyst, is dying to know what the team leader's final verdict on the kid is. Lee knows the truth. The boy actually sensed a hidden attack, even while Lee was perfectly masking his presence. And on top of that, he displayed a level of grit and willpower that's almost unnatural. It was a level of defiance far beyond anyone Lee had ever encountered. It's a total mystery. The high-level skill Lee used is called sensory confusion. While he was lost in his thoughts, the question was thrown at him once more. The whole room is hanging on his every word, waiting for the verdict. Lee shrugged and called the kid a grade-A jerk, who didn't hesitate for a second to try and take out his own superior. Enough talk. Get him to the infirmary, and everyone else, quit slacking and get back to the grind. Any other rookie wouldn't have even touched a hair on Lee's head, yet the team leader had to resort to top-tier, refined techniques just to secure the win. The team leader might be a total weirdo, but deep down, he now realizes the protagonist is a diamond in the rough. Meanwhile, our hero's buddies are drowning in paperwork and are absolutely spent. Johan looks like a zombie, struggling just to keep his eyelids from slamming shut. The protagonist finally trudged into the room, and the redhead was shocked to see him back on his feet so soon. Our boy took his seat in total silence. None of his friends have a clue why he's acting so moody and mysterious. It's clear as day. Gustavo is taking this loss very personally. Before heading home, he cornered Lee to demand some real answers. Gustavo wants the secret behind that blackout and how his boss managed to flip the script so easily. Lee smirked, clearly enjoying the fact that the kid is finally hungry to learn the elite moves. But our young hero played it off, claiming he was just curious. Lee just chuckled and said he did it because he's a guy who simply hates losing. Gustavo decided he'd had enough and turned to leave since that jerk was clearly gatekeeping the secrets. Lee called after him, reminding him this isn't a classroom and he's not going to be spoon-fed the answers. He challenged the boy to figure out himself and write a full post-mortem report on why he tasted dirt. And he expects the kid to do the brain work all by himself. If he tries to cheat and ask for help, he might as well quit. And if he thinks the world is unfair, the exit is that way. Gustavo needs to figure out fast exactly what kind of man he wants to be. One of the other rookies is currently boring everyone with a presentation for the analysis team. But Gustavo is stuck on replay, obsessed with his defeat and how Lee's power level is just off the charts. He can't fathom how that hit landed. It felt like the man was wielding an invisible phantom weapon. Their talk left a heavy weight on his shoulders. Gustavo knows he has to evolve and stand on his own 2 feet. Back in the lecture, the speaker is diving into the legend of Project Oracle. It's a system designed to glimpse the future, the very foundation of the analysis team. The blonde girl immediately raised her hand. She asked if the rumors about ancient seers were true, and the presenter confirmed they weren't just myths. The future isn't set in stone. It's a living, breathing force that's constantly shifting. The blonde argued that trying to predict something so fluid is just a recipe for false hope. And she's right. That's exactly why Project Oracle was built, and exactly why it ultimately crashed and burned. The reason for the failure is simple. The human brain is the ultimate glitch. A person's thoughts are rarely, if ever, 100% objective or true. Everyone lives in a world of half-truths that end up clouding their judgment. Believing something is real doesn't make it so, and that's the trap that leads people to their downfall. Suddenly, a light bulb went off in our protagonist's head. He remembered the farmer's wisdom. Masking energy isn't just about hiding. It's about hacking the enemy's perception. Immortals are super sensitive, so they can intercept signals before they're processed. Gustavo finally sees the trick. By mastering that principle, you can block sensations or even broadcast total lies to the enemy's brain. He remembers the sensation of grabbing his opponent and being 100% sure he had a lock on both of Lee's arms, but his brain had played him. The presentation finally wrapped up, but before the lights even came on, our boy had already bolted out the door. Replaying every microsecond of the fight, he realized the entire deception was orchestrated by his boss's right hand. Time to get that report started. The catch is, for the trick to land, Lee had to read exactly when the attack was coming. The team leader was just lying in wait to end the show with one perfect strike. Gustavo realized that high-level intuition is basically a form of short-term prophecy, a sixth sense only the true elites develop. After surviving 1,000 death matches, Gustavo isn't at that god-tier level yet, but he can start bridging the gap by syncing his intuition with his enhanced senses. Our boy's heart is pounding like a drum. He just unlocked a massive shortcut to power. He's convinced he can master this godlike skill in a heartbeat. He's not wasting any time. He sprinted straight for team leader Lee's office. Lee was caught completely off guard by the sudden intrusion and had to launch himself away from his desk with a powerful kick just to get some space. But the protagonist didn't follow through. He just stood there, frozen like a statue. He hadn't actually moved an inch from his starting position. It was a feint. He had perfectly manipulated his own presence, focusing purely on his target. Our boy predicted his boss's evasive maneuver and moved to intercept him in that exact spot. But the boss isn't a boss for nothing. Lee looked genuinely amused by the sudden counter feint, and once again, he unleashed that same mind-bending technique on our hero. Gustavo felt a tidal wave of energy coming from every direction at once, ending with him catching a stiff uppercut right to the jaw. The impact sent the boys staggering back several steps. Panda and the redhead are standing there with their jaws on the floor, try to process what they just saw, while the team leader just stood there wondering, what on earth has this kid turned into? Gustavo smirked and called it his live report. He's choosing to answer the boss's challenge with raw action instead of a boring essay. That single counterpunch was a total heavy hitter, enough to completely wreck the kid's jaw. But if he wanted to truly solve the riddle of his assignment, Gustavo knew this field research was the only way to do it. A random staffer watching the scene whispered that our MC had officially lost his damn mind. The guy looked like he needed a straitjacket and a therapist, but then Lee dropped a bombshell that shocked everyone. The boss actually admitted the little brat's logic wasn't entirely wrong. This left our hero scratching his head in confusion all over again. Before he could process the praise, the team leader barked an order for him to scrub the entire place clean immediately. Lee checked to see if anyone else was available to help, but Panda and the redhead were suddenly very busy acting chill. The veterans were given the green light to head home, while the rookie was stuck with a solo cleanup shift. Lee warned him that his memory is photographic. If so much as a paperclip is out of place tomorrow, they'll be held to pay. Once they were outside, Panda couldn't help but wonder what the rookie had actually pulled off in there. Kim pieced it together. The kid had successfully mimicked a sensory deception move, and she suspected Lee might have secretly coached him. The boss denied it, reminding them that instead of a written report, Gustavo chose to literally throw hands. And honestly, it looks like Lee actually respected the guts it took to pull a stunt like that. Kim admitted the kid's physical stats are elite tier, but the team leader is starting to suspect he's had some high-level prior training. No typical pureblood would fight with that kind of raw, wild style. Regardless, the kid followed the spirit of the order perfectly by testing the technique on the master himself. So, despite mastering a god-tier skill, our poor MC is stuck playing janitor until sunrise. The next morning, Kim was floored by Lee's new command. He's sending the rookie out on a live mission. He told her since she's short-staffed and needs a gopher, she might as well drag the newbie along for the ride. Kim called for him, and Gustavo practically teleported out of his chair with pure hype. Seconds later, the two of them are descending in the elevator, ready for action. They hit the armory floor, a playground of high-caliber hardware, to suit up for the real deal. The atmosphere gets heavy as they strap on their full tactical loadouts. Gustavo looks like a certified elite operator, or maybe just a guy way too excited for a game of extreme paintball. Suddenly, the base's sirens start screaming, tearing through the silence. A dreaded black portal has just ripped open right in the middle of a nearby field. Our protagonist has finally touched down at the designated hot zone. Intel says an invader is definitely coming through, and he's likely bringing some friend along. This is where the rookie has to learn the hard way how to read the battlefield's jargon and chaotic flow. Staring at the swirling rift, Gustavo feels the cold grip of anxiety as memories of the tragedy 9 years ago flood back. He remembers being saved by that mysterious shadow, the moment he swore he'd become the hunter instead of the prey. Today is day one of his dream becoming reality, though the portal looks surprisingly small for such a big threat. Gustavo tried to tell his senpai he was getting the jitters, but she gave him the total silent treatment. She's a professional through and through, too busy calibrating her arsenal to worry about his nerves. Taking the hint, our boy decided to focus on his own gear and lock in. That's when the small portal decided to pull a fast one and started expanding at a terrifying rate. This is a major anomaly. Kim didn't waste a second calling in for heavy reinforcements. But HQ is being stingy. They won't move a muscle until they see a live video feed of the threat. As soon as the footage hit the monitors back at the office, the team leader and Panda went into full-blown panic mode. They screamed for the two on-site to fall back immediately. This mission just turned into a suicide run. Gustavo can smell the danger in the air. Those creatures are going to swarm the area any second now. He looked at Kim and asked if they were really just going to pack up and leave. The woman didn't say a word, her silence speaking volumes. Gustavo flashed back to the satellite map he studied. There's a civilian city just a stone's throw away from here. Those people are sitting ducks. Ignoring HQ's retreat order, Gustavo demanded to know how long until the cavalry actually arrives. Kim checked the ETA. Approximately 15 agonizing minutes. HQ's voices crackled through the comms again, demanding they obey orders and save their own skins. Then, the first nightmare fuel creature began to pull itself out of the portal's darkness. Gustavo is torn. His gut is telling him that running away now would be a death sentence for the innocents nearby. If they hesitate in the kill zone for too long, they're going to be the first course on the monster's menu. Modern tech has made the world safe from car crashes, but the stats don't lie. Invaders still claim nearly 10,000 lives a year, and losing an immortal asset is a cost the company hates to pay. The protocol is clear. Be cautious and live to fight another day. Except our hero noticed his partner wasn't exactly making a run for the exit either. Through the headset, Lee was losing his mind, screaming about what those two idiots were still doing in the hot zone. Finally, the creature roared as it fully emerged, but its grand entrance was cut short by a hail of lead. King unleashed her weapon, painting the grass with monster blood. Gustavo knows that if they leave, the civilians are toast, and he's not about to let that happen on his watch. Gearing up for the brawl, he joked that he might be falling for her bad girl attitude as more shots rang out. Back at HQ, Lee was practically vibrating with stress watching his team disobey him. To cover their tracks, they just pretended the comms were lagging and the signal was terrible. Gustavo kept his finger on the trigger, providing steady cover fire. Beside him, his partner performed a lightning-fast tactical reload. A whole pack of monsters is now pouring out a rift, but so far, the duo is putting on a masterclass in crowd control, holding the line perfectly. The intel suggested only 10 targets, so they came light with just enough ammo for a skirmish. But with the portal's pattern going haywire, they could be looking at hundreds of hungry hounds. Gustavo's mind is racing. The situation is about to go from difficult to disastrous in a heartbeat. The sound of gunfire continues to echo across the field as they pelt the advancing swarm. Kim is in the zone, her focus absolute as she picks off targets with surgical precision. They're the only things standing between the city and a literal bloodbath. Ammo counters are blinking red as wave after wave of creatures keep coming like an endless tide. Gustavo shouted over the noise, asking if she had a plan B, and she gave a sharp nod. The play? He plays the tasty bait to draw them in, and she'll act as the shredder to wipe them out. It's a desperate gambit. Once those magazines are empty, it's game over. And just like that, Gustavo's gun clicked empty, the worst sound in the world. One of the hounds saw its opening and lunged, ready to rip his throat out. But his partner wasn't about to let her rookie get eaten on his first day. Even though her guns were dry too, she proved she could still handle business with some good old-fashioned, high-speed violence. Gustavo watched, genuinely floored by her lethal elegance. No time to celebrate. There are still plenty of monsters left to kill. Kim's movement is a blur of motion, a breathtaking dance of death that leaves our protagonist completely starstruck. He doesn't know the science behind the superdrugs, but he's certain of one thing. Kim is a human-shaped weapon. Determined to keep up, he jumped back into the fray to provide support. Then, the very last bullet was spent. It was officially silent on the gun front. It's time for Gustavo to ditch the bait role and embrace his heritage. No more hiding. He's finally letting his full power off the leash. He started the show by literally crushing a monster's skull. Then, he snatched a creature by the leg and used it like a biological baseball bat to smash the rest of the pack. Against all odds, they're actually holding the line against the onslaught. But these hounds are relentless and incredibly fast. King is forced to draw her tactical knives, dancing through the swarm and finishing them off, with a trail of monster corpses in her wake. She knows she has to keep their attention pinned on her at all costs. Gustavo watched her move, noticing how she's constantly repositioning to keep from being buried under a mountain of fur and teeth. But our boy let his guard down for a split second and ended up with a hound's jaws clamped onto his arm. Big mistake. He didn't even flinch, he just drew his own blade, and Gustavo ended that problem permanently, sending the creature that tried to snack on him straight to the afterlife. Our boy realized he couldn't afford to slack off. He had to stay 100 locked in. Thinking back to his partner's strategy, he knew he had to be the ultimate bait to lure the pack while she played the executioner. Let's be real, in a mess like this, they were fresh out of better options. Gustavo pushed his limits, sharpening his senses with every high-level technique he'd picked up so far. Suddenly, the battlefield clicked. He could perceive every movement around him with terrifying clarity. Even Kim could feel the shift in the air. The rookie was evolving right before her eyes. Our hero actually pulled it off. He grabbed the aggro of every single monster, giving his partner the perfect opening. But being the center of attention has its price. The creatures began sinking their teeth into him, obsessed with their new target. Gustavo was officially in the danger zone. Kim, watching the swarm overwhelm him, realized she might not be fast enough to clear the field. But our protagonist isn't about to let his story end as monster snacks. He's built to survive this. He blocked out the agony, focusing his mind into a razor-sharp point. Gustavo tanked only the hits that would have been fatal, saving his energy for a massive counteroffensive. Just as the farmer taught him, he used his entire frame as both an unbreakable shield and a lethal weapon. A single invader loose in the city means a bloodbath. That's the weight driving our boy's determination. Out of nowhere, the thunderous roar of heavy artillery began to shake the earth, shredding the monster ranks in a rain of lead and fire. The cavalry finally rolled in, calling the duo absolute lunatics for trying to hold the line alone. Kim was visibly rattled, her cool exterior cracking as she rushed to check on the rookie. Gustavo didn't even care about his wounds. He just wanted to know if any monster had slipped through. Seeing his mangled state, she shook her head. He had held the line like an absolute legend. With those words of validation, the adrenaline finally ran out, and Gustavo collapsed into the dirt. The backup squad looked around for more targets, but realized there was literally nothing left for them to kill. The aftermath was so gruesome, it left the seasoned supervisor completely speechless. At least 200 monster corpses were piled up across the site like a grim mountain. It was a miracle. Even a squad of 10 elite immortals would have struggled with those numbers. And yet a boosted human and a single hybrid had just pulled off the impossible. The woman knew the truth, though. The mission's success rested entirely on the rookie's shoulders. Back at HQ, Lee was absolutely losing it, fuming over their bad signal excuse. Gustavo played it cool and stuck to the script, but the team leader was vibrating with rage because they'd flat-out ignored a direct order. Lee looked like he was 1 second away from a total meltdown, ready to knock both their heads together. Kim, stepping up like a true leader, decided to shoulder the entire blame herself. The boss snapped, asking if she'd forgotten her rank. She calmly reminded him she's just an employee doing her job. But since they'd gone rogue, Lee asked if she was planning to quit before he had the chance to fire her. A disciplinary hearing was inevitable, but for now, they were kicked out of his office. Just as they turned to leave, Lee called out to our protagonist. He looked the kid in the eye and asked if he was proud of the chaos he'd caused. Gustavo tried to act humble, but the team leader told him to cut the act and stop lying to his face. As punishment, Gustavo was sentenced to writing a daily apology letter. Our boy wondered if he'd get the hammer too, but the boss just smirked and asked if he was asking for trouble. That drama would come later, for the time being. The boss was satisfied with making him write lines like a naughty schoolboy. Meanwhile, the legend of their stand began to spread. Everyone was talking about the duo that slaughtered a whole horde solo. Yuan pointed out that rookies on probation are usually safe since the company can just dump them. Therefore, the full weight of the corporate punishment landed squarely on Kim's shoulders. And honestly, that's a total low blow. Getting punished for saving lives just because you disobeyed is the peak of corporate stupidity. Gustavo knew exactly what was at stake. That nearby town would have been a graveyard. They had to choose between the rulebook and human lives, and they chose correctly. When the boss grilled him about being proud, our boy had to keep his poker face on, even though he knew in his soul that he'd done the right thing. The problem is, this corporate political drama is already starting to drain his battery. On his way out, he was intercepted by his senior partner, who looked him in the eye and told him he did a phenomenal job out there. Kim said it with genuine heart, dropping the cold professional act for a moment. That was the only ego boost Gustavo actually needed. Finally, the guilt washed away, and he knew he'd made the right call. Back at the house, his mom was already fishing for gossip, asking to see some photos. He was confused, but she admitted she wanted to look at these coworkers he was always raving about. He told her his partner was a ghost online. No profile pics, no social media, nothing. That's when the matriarch dropped her real agenda. She was scouting for a potential daughter-in-law. Gustavo tried to shut it down, but Mom just winked, saying that's how every great romance starts. But he couldn't laugh it off. The looming disciplinary hearing was still weighing on him. The big guns were already gathering in the main hall to put Kim's career on trial. The hearing kicked off with the board hammering her for ignoring the retreat order. Kim didn't make excuses. She stood her ground and admitted everything. Lee tried to play defense, explaining how chaotic the front lines are, but a cranky old man with glasses told him to zip it. But the team leader isn't the type to back down from a fight, especially for his team. The tension was snapped when our protagonist suddenly walked into the lion's den. One of the stuffy officials asked the boy if he'd been coerced into staying. He gave a firm no. So, they tried to intimidate him, asking if he knew what happened to troublemakers. Gustavo coolly stated it was the only logical choice, making the old man with glasses wonder where this kid got his guts. Lee jumped in, contradicting the board and praising the rookie's sharp judgment. Thanks to their disobedience, a whole town is still breathing. The room went dead silent. Lee reminded them of the core mission. Saving lives is the only thing that actually matters in this job. Since he wouldn't stop barking, they ordered him out, but the team leader wasn't about to abandon his squad. Someone told him to pipe down, and Lee asked if they actually had the stones to make him. Our hero realized this company is a literal circus. Anyway, Lee brushed it off, telling the board they were making a mountain out of a molehill. The atmosphere was getting thick enough to cut with a knife. Our protagonist figured it was a good time to make a tactical exit. Lee shouted one last time about being flexible, saying this bureaucratic nonsense was traumatizing the rookies. Once they were out, the extra following Gustavo couldn't decide if Lee was a hero or a hazard. It's great having a boss who has your back, but he's playing a dangerous game with his own career. Gustavo didn't realize Lee was gambling his future for them. The guy's a jerk, but he's their jerk. After a bit, the two split up and headed their separate ways. But before the elevator could close, a hand shot out. It was Panda, looking like he just sprinted there. Dying for the tea, he asked how the hearing went. Gustavo told him the team leader was basically a one-man army in there. Panda laughed, classically, and asked if any other drama went down. That question sent Gustavo spiraling into his own thoughts. He flashed back to the secret offer from the audit team extra to jump ship. He's got some massive life choices ahead of him. But for now, he just told Panda it was a quiet day. Shortly after, the rest of Team 3 dragged themselves back to the office, Lee looking like a thundercloud. Panda asked for the verdict, and Kim dropped the bomb. She was grounded from field missions for the next 30 days. For a field agent, that's basically a career-stalling nightmare. Lee was still fuming, calling the decision a total load of garbage. To a rookie, it sounded like a vacation, but the heavy silence in the room told Gustavo this was a disaster. He wanted to ask more, but the air was too heavy. And just like that, it was back to the boring life of desk work. Our boy finished his latest apology letter and slid it to the boss. Lee read it, gave him a weird look, and asked if he was crazy, to which Gustavo admitted he's new to the whole sorry business. At least he was finally part of the crew. King stepped up to use her vacation to turn the boy into an even deadlier weapon. She pushed him to overclock his immortal senses, even giving him the secret blueprint on how to eventually take down a monster like team leader Lee. He churned out yet another apology letter, but the tone was getting suspiciously bold and sarcastic. Gustavo is still obsessed with catching his team leader off guard, hunting for every tiny opening to leech more combat secrets from man. He's leaning heavily on his intuition to read the flow of battle. But he quickly realized the boss is a total enigma with no fixed patterns, making him nearly impossible to predict. Left with no other choice, Gustavo has to bet everything on his raw instincts. But as usual, he walked right into another trap. Lee casually dismantled his defense and landed a clean hit on our boy without breaking sweat. Panda was clocking the sparring session, 6 minutes flat, a personal best for the rookie. Rubbing his aching back, Gustavo had to admit that the team leader is on a whole different level of power. Then, one morning, his daily routine got flipped upside down. As our boy was busy scribbling his latest apology, the team leader barked for him to come over. He demanded to know what that blonde moron from the audit team had whispered to him in the elevator. That extra had actually tried to poach our hero for his own squad before playing it off as a joke, leaving Gustavo totally baffled. Gustavo wondered how the boss even found out, but he decided to spill the beans honestly. Lee's eyes narrowed. He realized someone was trying to steal his favorite new punching bag. Spooked by the murderous aura radiating from a boss, Gustavo started sweating bullets. And as if on cue, that very same blonde extra strolled into the office like he owned the place. Lee didn't say a word. He just blurred across the room and delivered a violent kick that sent the guy flying. The veterans didn't even blink. They expected this, but our protagonist just watched from the floor in utter disbelief. The extra wheezed, asking what he did wrong, and Lee snapped that it was for trying to recruit his rookie behind his back. Desperate to save his skin, the extra stammered that it was all just a harmless prank. Before Lee could finish the job, the stern man with the glasses marched into the office. Our hero recognized him instantly. It was the big shot leader of the external audit team. He glared at Lee, asking what kind of circus he was running. The crazy boss just smirked, saying he was just playing around and that a broken arm was hardly a big deal. But the man with the glasses wasn't in the mood for jokes, calling Lee out for overreacting to a simple conversation. That's when the blender realized the whole floor knew about the offer, and he absolutely hated the idea of his rookie being headhunted by another department. The audit leader just sighed, calling Lee a total loose cannon. Now that the cards were on the table, the man with glasses turned to Gustavo, wanting his take since Team 3 was known to be a literal living hell. Lee roared that the audit team had no business here because the rookie belonged to him, heart and soul, bellowing so the whole floor could hear. He issued a warning. If anyone else so much as looked at this kid, they were going to find out exactly why his nickname is the Blender. Gustavo watched the spectacle, fully convinced his boss was a certified psychopath. The man with the glasses reminded them that the company values personal freedom, so he asked for Gustavo's honest opinion, promising that his choice would be respected. Every eye in the room locked onto the boy, waiting for him to jump ship. Gustavo was caught off guard, but his mind was already made up. Even though his leader was a maniac, Panda was a complete weirdo, and the only girl on the team was a human ice cube. Despite all that, he chose to stay right where he was. The man with the glasses was stunned. According to Johan, this kid had always been a bit of a freak. He tried one last time, offering a way out if the problem was just their unhinged leader. But our boy knew exactly what he was doing. He'd rather learn from a monster than a bureaucrat. Hearing that, Lee took the opportunity to be as petty as possible, literally sticking his tongue out at the audit leader. The leader asked if Gustavo truly believed he could learn anything from that idiot, and our boy didn't flinch. Clearly, he was dead set on surviving the chaos of Team 3. Defeated and rejected, the audit crew finally cleared out of the office. Once the dust settled, Lee turned to Gustavo, asking why he was still staring like a creep. He acted like it was obvious the kid would stay. He wasn't going anywhere. And just like that, it was back to the grind. Panda whispered that the boss was secretly beaming with pride. Walking past Gustavo's desk, Lee spotted a piece of paper and demanded to know what it was. Gustavo sheepishly admitted it was his unfinished apology letter. Seeing the look on the madman's face, Gustavo started to panic. That letter was actually a sarcastic poem mocking the boss. After the inevitable beating that followed, Panda turned to the female lead and noted that the office's crazy quota had just doubled. But while they were brawling, a high-priority mission notification popped up. Lee immediately snapped into professional mode, demanding the mission briefing. The real question was, who was actually ready to handle this one? For the team leader, the choice was a no-brainer. He only had one rookie available for field duty, Gustavo. Our boy was actually stoked, eager to find out where they were shipping him off to. Lee explained the mission. He was going to the airport to serve as a human radar. His target was a girl, a dangerous supernatural shapeshifter, and he was given a photo of her true form. She was a high-level mercenary suspected of smuggling critical documents, which is why multiple shapeshifter specialists were called in. Gustavo knew the deal. She could swap faces, but she couldn't hide her scent from Tracker like him. Lee asked about backup. Panda confirmed the blonde girl and the silent princess were on the roster. Lee groaned, unable to believe he was sending his mediocre rookie with those two prodigies. But rules are rules. They needed at least 3 immortals on site, and with everyone else busy, the kid was the only option. It was a trio of first years, and our boy was assigned as the muscle to keep the other 2 from getting handled. Lee warned Gustavo to stay sharp and make sure absolutely nothing happened to the silent princess column. The analysis team arrived shortly after to give them the full rundown. The speaker started the brief, but immediately got distracted by a fresh, nasty bruise on Gustavo's face. Gustavo just played it off, saying he and his leader had a difference of opinion. Calm. Remember the guy was on the infamous Team 3, which pretty much explained the injuries. The operation was set for the local airport. The plan was simple. Go undercover as civilians and start the hunt at daybreak. They were scheduled to meet the primary strike team already waiting at the location. The strike team leader was all business, assuming the rookies were briefed and ready to go. Gustavo and the blonde girl were tasked with patrolling the interior and monitoring the crowds, while the silent princess would sweep the exterior and the ticket counters. The comms were live, and everything was going smoothly, until two men started closing in on Gustavo. They were the local security detail. Gustavo caught their scent immediately. They were shapeshifters, apologizing for their late arrival. They confirmed they were there to act as the official security escort for the mission. Before the hunt officially started, Gustavo pulled Kong aside with a question. He didn't like the idea of the silent princess being left all alone on the perimeter. The guy was annoyed by Gustavo's informal tone and made sure the rookie knew his place. Kong explained they needed a high-sensitivity immortal for that spot, which is why she was chosen. The blonde girl noted the sheer scale of the op, but the silent princess coldly remarked that she was the only real immortal in the group. Regardless of the ego trips, they had a job to do, and the guards were there to provide the necessary support. Once the meeting broke, the silent princess stood up and vanished without a word, followed closely by the blonde girl, who didn't seem interested in small talk either. Our protagonist was left standing there alone. He apologized to Kong for his teammates' prickly personalities. Kong shrugged it off, saying only results matter, leaving Gustavo to realize he was stuck working with two total idiots. On the morning of the op, a random guy approached the blonde girl, trying to hit on her because of her looks, but she shut him down instantly, claiming she was married. Gustavo saw the whole thing and moved in, demanding to know if the creep was bothering her. After the guy scurried off, the blonde girl told Gustavo he was being a bit too intense. Gustavo knew he had to lock back into mission mode, but scanning the airport was a nightmare. Every single person there looked perfectly normal. Suddenly, a comms alert buzzed in, ordering them to double-check a fresh lead. The description, a blue shirt, jeans, and looks to be a guy in his 30s. The hunt was officially on, and they had to comb the crowd for those exact details. Trying his best to blend in, the target moved like a ghost through the terminal, clutching a bulky backpack. At first glance, Gustavo's radar wasn't picking up any red flags from the man. The blonde girl noticed his confusion and explained why the silent princess was on a different level. She wasn't like other agents. She was the real deal, a high-tier pureblood. Her senses were dialed up to 11, making her hyper-aware of her surroundings. Even the tiniest flicker in the atmosphere couldn't escape her spiritual detection. With the target in sight, the squad began to tighten the noose and close in. Gustavo flashed back to his old man's wisdom. To be a top-shelf immortal, you need god-tier senses, though that usually comes with a trash personality. His dad was glad he wasn't a total blockhead, but he wished the kid had a bit more of that sensitive spark. But don't sleep on our boy. He's a fast learner with plenty of hidden potential. He'd already proven his worth during those hellish training sessions with the boss. Deciding to stop playing detective, he took the lead and confronted the target head-on. Meanwhile, the police started sealing off the area, pushing the curious public back. The crowd was clueless, with some even wondering if they were witnessing a live movie set. Gustavo cranked his perception to the max, scanning every inch for hidden threats. Out of nowhere, a chilling thought hit the comms. What if there's more than one target? That one question turned the tension up to a breaking point. The peaceful airport vibe shattered as a suspicious figure made a sudden move. One of the cops on the perimeter already had his finger itching on the trigger. As the fake officer prepared to open fire, the silent princess scrambled to regroup with the rest of the team. Bang! Bang! Multiple gunshots rang out, sending the crowd into a panicked frenzy. The mission just went from 0 to 100, spiraling into absolute mayhem. The rogue cop who started the shooting was neutralized before he could do more damage. Hearing the chaos explode, Gustavo didn't hesitate and sprinted toward the heart of the trouble. That's when his instinct screamed. Something was lunging at them from the shadows. It was a direct hit aimed at the blonde girl, the poor girl. Came within an inch of getting her head taken off. Luckily, she pulled off a clutch dodge and countered with a heavy blow to the bald attacker's face. The guy hit the floor like a sack of bricks, completely decommissioned. It turns out they aren't just thugs. These attackers are high-level psychic power users. Gustavo's radar blipped again. He could feel two more nearby. But the real question was, how many more of these freaks were hiding in the shadows? The enemies began to scatter in every direction to lose them. Gustavo knew he had to pin them down fast. Rewind to 2 days ago. The higher-ups were digging through everyone's classified files. Kong was genuinely impressed by the silent princess, elite pedigree, traditional family, just like the blonde girl. But it was our protagonist's resume that really caught his eye. The rumors about his scrap with the team leader had reached everyone's ears. He's got the skills and the charisma, exactly the kind of monster I need for this crew. The light bulb head instructor walked by and joked that the kid was basically a mirror image of our MC. Back in the present, the sound of gunfire reached Kang's ears, and he immediately feared the worst for his rookies. With the situation going south, he abandoned his post to go in as the ultimate backup. He needed to see the carnage for himself to wrap his head around it. The moment he stepped into the terminal, one of the police officers gave off a strange vibe. Every alarm bell in Kang's head went off. He decided to shadow the man and see where he led. Kong knew our protagonist was a master at negotiating with his fists, so he issued a direct command. Our boy was given the green light to hunt the target and use as much aggressive persuasion as needed. Kong tried to check in on the others. The silent princess had taken a nasty hit, but Gustavo was all ready, charging forward to finish what they started. The airport had turned into a literal war zone with blows being traded at every corner. Psychic energy was exploding everywhere, making the air vibrate with power. Shaking off the damage, the silent princess gritted her teeth and jumped back into the fray. One of the fake cops was already out for the count, and the blonde girl reported that the sector was crawling with more hostiles. She counted 7 threats, but the big boss was still that elusive shapeshifter woman. The silent princess insisted she was fine. A hole in the chest is just a scratch. Kong barked at the rookie to stay focused. He wasn't about to lose a talent like her. He had to play the strict mentor to keep them alive. One bandit tried to spray them with lead, but Kong went full beast mode and absolutely demolished him. Moving like a blur, he snatched the soul out of another clown before he could blink. It's time for a complete sweep. No thug left standing. Downstairs, the guy in the cop uniform had already ditched his disguise for something more discreet. But he wasn't fast enough. Our protagonist was already breathing down his neck. Gustavo smirked, asking if the guy was finally tired of the cardio. The target realized the kid was a persistent one, definitely an immortal. Gustavo just scoffed. Wasn't it obvious? After a bit of back and forth, the thug just laughed, feeling zero threat. The target mocked him for coming alone, but Gustavo told him the cavalry was just seconds away. The man just grinned, telling him it was a fatal mistake to corner him without backup. Right then, the target's body began to grotesquely swell and mutate. His psychic gift was raw physical power, turning him into a terrifying mini-Hulk. Since immortals are hard to kill, this thug planned on taking his time to turn our boy's skull into dust. Gustavo came to the grim realization that backup was still a long 10 minutes away. In his head, that was plenty of time to wrap this up and still grab coffee. Soon, the airport was being cleared of hostiles, and the medical teams were moving in. Kong cursed under his breath. The primary target, the shapeshifter, was nowhere to be found. The blonde girl was spot on. The whole firefight was just a flashy smoke screen for the real asset to slip away. But on the lower floor, the real show was just starting. This overgrown extra actually thought he had a chance at winning. He wound up a massive, bone-crushing haymaker, aiming to erase the protagonist's head from his shoulders. Gustavo didn't even flinch, blocking the strike with zero effort. The thug wasn't too worried at first, until he tried to pull his arm back and realized he was caught in an unbreakable vice grip. Gustavo looked him in the eye and asked if he'd skipped lunch, because that punch felt more like a tickle than a death blow. With a surge of power, our MC casually snapped the clown's arm like a dry twig using just one hand. The agonizing scream echoed as the bandit nearly blacked out from the shock. And the best part? The real beating hadn't even started yet. Realizing he was about to be turned into a human panini, the bald thug tried a desperate counter. He threw a wild high kick, hoping for a lucky shot to the head. Flashing back to his training sessions, Gustavo knew that redirecting raw force was child's play. It was almost too easy to parry a strike from a meathead with zero martial arts technique. This gave Gustavo the perfect opening to get a little hands-on, delivering a strike that completely rearranged the bandit's dental work, sending the poor guy soaring through the air like a punctured festival balloon. The thug hit the dirt, looking like a total wreck. Gustavo looked down at him and cold-bloodedly told him he was simply lacking enough hatred. That skirmish didn't even last 3 minutes. Even after the easy win, our MC still has to kill time waiting for the cleanup crew to arrive. Since he's a naturally curious guy, he started poking around that mysterious backpack the guy was carrying. Turns out, high-level shapeshifters can even mimic inanimate objects. But there's a catch. She can't turn into metal, and our boy is already flicking his lighter, ready to turn that backpack into a bonfire. At first, it was just a bag, until a mouth suddenly sprouted on the fabric, screaming that she surrendered. Gustavo wasn't in the mood for games, and told her he had a few burning questions. The backpack begged him to back off with the lighter. Besides, she claimed she couldn't spill everything without flushing her entire career down the drain. However, she admitted she was more than willing to cut a deal to keep from being toasted. Gustavo wasn't buying the negotiation talk and mockingly asked if she could shrink down into a cigarette instead, just so he could get a light. The woman shrieked that she was already at her physical limit. Seeing she was stuck as a bag, Gustavo asked what she was waiting for. It was time to change back into a human. The backpack replied with a bit of embarrassment that she'd need to borrow his coat first. Reinforcements finally swarmed the floor, and they were greeted by a scene they couldn't wrap their heads around. Gustavo was standing there in his undershirt, having lent his coat to the woman, while the Rhino Bandit lay defeated nearby. Kong demanded an explanation, and our boy started breaking down the whole chaotic situation for the report. He explained that the bald thug attacked him, so he had to deliver a little corrective surgery. Oh, and that backpack? That's actually their shape-shifting target. A few moments later, the silent princess finally made her grand entrance. But our protagonist just smirked, telling her she missed the party. The show was already over. The bald bandit was hauled off in cuffs immediately. To spice things up, Gustavo leaned in and whispered to the silent princess that he was the one who bagged the prize. The police chief in the other department was floored, asking if the kid really took down that monster solo. Our boy just played it off, saying he got lucky. He made sure to mention he didn't lose his cool just because he found the target, unlike a certain princess he knew. Even the shapeshifter mercs were starting to dig our hero's cocky attitude. That was until someone asked if he actually knew whose lights he had just put out. Seeing Gustavo's blank stare, even the shapeshifter woman was face-palming. That thug is a high-profile criminal wanted in multiple countries, better known as Rhino. He's got a massive bounty on his head that would make anyone rich. Gustavo realized in an instant that he'd just tangled with the underworld's heavy hitters, and his luck was actually a sensational feat. The bystanders assumed it was a bloody war, but since our boy is an immortal, his wounds had already vanished. Only Gustavo knows it only took one perfect strike to end it. Kong was absolutely beaming with pride over the result and gave our boy a well-deserved pat on the back. Now it was time to talk business, a job this messy definitely wasn't in the original contract. The fact that a rookie ended the fight with bare hands and no gear left the policewoman a bit salty. Even so, she agreed to the terms, but had one lingering question for the boy. She wanted to know the official rank of this monster rookie who just shook the airport. Gustavo introduced himself with a grin, claiming he was just a fresh recruit on probation. Back at the base, Lee gave him a reality check. No need to broadcast his name every time unless he's chasing clout. Gustavo admitted that being a legend is a hard habit to break. Diving into the intel, they confirmed the bald thug belongs to a terrifyingly dangerous syndicate. The masterminds behind the chaos are from an organization called Prometheus. The girl was hauling top-secret files for them, data so sensitive it could start a war. Before clocking out, Lee asked the kid if he felt like a big hero for catching a terrorist, and our boy gave a simple, confident yes. Back at his desk, the honeymoon was over. He was ordered to write a full report, and this time, no sarcasm allowed. Turns out, Prometheus is a bunch of mad scientists obsessed with turning every human into a god. Just like the myth of the Titan who stole fire from the heavens. Thinking about it, Gustavo realized the world is crawling with high-functioning lunatics. If crazy people could fly, you'd never be able to see the sun. Just then, a man in glasses approached our hero and told him to follow him. Gustavo was led into a high-security room, where a very important figure was already waiting. It was the big boss, Mufasa, who wanted a face-to-face with the kid who took down Rhino. Since Gustavo greeted him with stiff formality, Mufasa joked that he was acting like a cop, and the boy admitted he was still learning the ropes. To Mufasa, it didn't matter. He believed everyone is allowed a few rookie mistakes. But he was genuinely impressed by the terrorist capture and asked if the boy had any specific rewards in mind. Gustavo didn't skip a beat. He wanted a promotion. Mufasa couldn't help but admire that raw ambition. However, one win wasn't enough to skip the ladder. It was only a big deal because a newbie did it. Gustavo, sensing the no, asked why he was even there, and Mufasa told him he just wanted to give him a personal well done. Then he asked if there was anything else the kid wanted. Our protagonist went quiet for a second before admitting that a fat stack of cash is always a good motivator. He sent a chunk of the reward money to his mom, whose reaction was pure joy. After the airport job, Gustavo became the company's go-to guy for field missions. Now he finally gets why the team leader is so unhinged. In just 3 short months, Gustavo bagged 5 supernatural fugitives, on top of helping seal 10 portals that threatened to swallow the city. He also discovered that the team leader despises these chore missions and hates reading the boys' reports even more. But honestly, it's Gustavo's fault for including useless details, like exactly how many times the boss picks his nose during a fight. Despite the busy schedule, he never stopped his brutal training regimen. He's no longer the kid who gets KO'd in 2 seconds by the team leader. In fact, Lee doesn't even bother training with him for more than 10 minutes anymore. Within those 10 minutes, Gustavo always walks away with a painful but valuable lesson. Even so, he still hasn't spotted a single chink in the boss's armor. 3 months after the airport incident, Kim is in a drunken rage, screaming about how she's going to bury everyone. She was slumped at a restaurant table with the crew, essentially arguing with the air. It's her thing. One drink, and she starts holding a one-woman debate before passing out. Taking advantage of the chill vibes, Panda asked the boss if he ever thought he'd find a girlfriend. Lee just scoffed, and looking at our MC, the mad leader warned him not to get wasted, as he didn't want to deal with a drunk rookie making a scene. The restaurant is a private spot inside the company just for immortals, very low-key and cozy. Everyone was soaking in the booze, and Gustavo started getting that familiar itch for a challenge. Lee noticed the look and told the kid to stop staring at him like he was a piece of steak. But what our hero really wanted to know was just how much he'd leveled up over the last few months. That's why he looked the boss in the eye and asked for a real fight, no holding back. That proposal sent a shockwave through the rest of the team. They were absolutely floored by his guts. Lee figured the kid was just talking through the alcohol, but Gustavo insisted his mind was crystal clear. The truth? The team leader was secretly thrilled by the challenge and was already heading to the sparring hall. Our boy followed him, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. Lee asked if Gustavo was ready to be introduced to a world of pain, and our boy casually replied that he'd prefer a real challenge instead. The usual training drills were getting stale. It was time to let the real violence fly. Panda crept over to watch the carnage, hearing the bone-crunching sounds through the heavy doors. Those two were unleashing every dirty trick and cruel move they'd ever learned. Gustavo was being pushed to the brink, but he managed to actually snap the boss's arm in a clinch. But that wasn't enough to end the night. Lee was already winding up a blow meant to cave in the kid's skull. But our protagonist managed to pull off a miracle block, only to realize he was about to get blindsided by a phantom strike. The arm he had just shattered seconds ago was already perfectly healed and moving again. The impact on Gustavo's head was so loud it echoed through the entire hall. The match was effectively over, and a stunned Panda asked if the rookie had finally mastered that level of power, because he actually saw the kid break the boss's arm. Lee just grunted, saying they were playing 2 different games. Since it hit him that he'd actually snapped the boss's arm, Lee argued their situations were completely different. Gazing down at our MC, who's currently counting stars on the floor, Lee smirked, realizing this kid is definitely built different. Elsewhere, a mysterious figure was scanning this year's rookie roster and stopped dead when he saw Gustavo, the newbie who's been the talk of every water cooler in the building. He barked an order to his secretary, get a full deep-dive dossier on this boy immediately. The stats were eye-popping. The man realized Gustavo is a natural-born fixer who gets results. However, his official immortal specialty was a total goose egg, 0 talent detected. It's a miracle he's on the elite security team with such trash stats. The secretary noted his last mission was a flawless S rank, but looking at his raw data, the man concluded the kid is painfully average in almost every important category. He also spotted a bizarre footnote. Apparently, our hero is a human sponge who's practically immune to alcohol. He dismissed Gustavo as just a street-fighting freak who lacks self-control and the elegance of a true immortal. He decided right then and there, this glitch in the system needs to be removed from the game board. Staring at his own dismal record, Gustavo asked how these immortal grades are even calculated. Panda explained it's all about the vibe check, a mix of observation and bias. Panda admitted his own score is in the gutter because he's a frequent flyer in the disciplinary office. Still, Gustavo wasn't having it. He felt his F-tier rating was a total insult to his skills. His workplace attitude was also in the trash, likely a side effect of his daily cage matches with the boss. For 2 months, their constant shouting and brawling had been a massive headache for the rest of the floor. Gustavo also couldn't fathom why they labeled him a heavyweight alcoholic. Turns out, that specific praise came from his unhinged boss, who actually respected his legendary liver. As for that ominous red mark by his name, it means he's officially on the watch list. Gustavo hoped it was a good warning, but Panda broke the news. It's a "you're about to be fired" warning. If the kid doesn't pull a miracle out of his hat during the next evaluation, he'll be the first one tossed out the front door. This realization hit our hero like a freight train. Suddenly, the PA system crackled to life, summoning all fresh meat to the training grounds. This was it, the main event of their evaluation. Gustavo's friends are already there, and they knew our boy was the office celebrity for all the wrong reasons. Gustavo realized his embarrassing file had gone viral and felt like his dignity had just left the building. His buddies told him to chin up. If he got fired and opened a popcorn stand, they'd be his one investors. The exam whistle blew, and the recruits locked into their combat stances. As our MC stepped into the arena, he turned to his friends and asked if they remembered the Sixth Sense, because he's about to drop a plot twist that'll leave the whole company speechless. In a high-tech room, walled with monitors, the higher-ups were ready to watch the fireworks. Even Mufasa showed up to witness the chaos. He admitted he was bored and wanted a front-row seat for the best show in town. A literal clash of the titans between the company's elite rookies. Our protagonist was up first, and his dance partner was none other than the Silent Princess herself. It goes without saying, there's absolutely no love lost between these two. The fight ignited with a level of intensity that threatened to melt the cameras. Mid-swing, Gustavo flashed back to a secret test he'd taken earlier. A perception challenge, finding hidden patterns in a deck of cards faster than a supercomputer. He'd cleared the impossible task in under 3 seconds, a feat of pure instinct. Now, our boy is ready to let the Silent Princess experience that terrifying speed firsthand. When the observers saw the footage of his training in the gravity lab, they nearly choked. The kid was moving at 12x Earth's gravity. That's triple the limit that usually sends a normal recruit to the hospital. The princess was getting a rude awakening. She was being absolutely dismantled. She couldn't even track the shadows of our hero's strikes, let alone block them. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was a one-sided beatdown. The MC's stats were breaking the machine. His lung capacity was legendary, and his raw strength was scaling to final boss levels. His reflexes? Instantaneous. He was moving before the thought even registered. His flexibility was a breathtaking display of peak human or superhuman performance. In every single physical metric, he was light years ahead of the average immortal. And the Silent Princess was learning that lesson the painful way. Our boy actually felt bad enough to apologize. He'd been playing with the safety on this whole time. But after surviving the blender, Gustavo realized that holding back was a waste of potential. He finally decided to stop hiding in the shadows of his own talent, unleashing his full power and literally knocking the Silent Princess out of the rankings. There was only one box left to check for our protagonist's ascent. He's officially labeled as an S-rank anomaly. Naturally, Lee had to give him a lecture for being too enthusiastic. He'd basically hospitalized the 2 top female recruits. Gustavo shrugged. He treats everyone equally, friends included, as Lee parried a playful strike from the kid. He asked if Gustavo was secretly a dentist since he loves removing teeth so much. Gustavo gave a snarky reply about his rank, and Lee almost sent him to the infirmary to match his victims. While heading home, a luxury car slowed down beside our hero. It was that creepy high-level executive, let's call him Pompadour Guy. He offered Gustavo a ride he couldn't refuse. Inside, Pompadour Guy cut to the chase. He's building a special team, and there's a seat with Gustavo's name on it. He wasn't asking. He was expecting the kid to accept the invitation. Gustavo was speechless, but the guy told him to just keep doing his thing for now. He just needs his yes for when the project goes live. Trying to be friendly, he asked if the kid was a fan of high-quality meat. A weird question to end on, but our boy was finally allowed to vanish into the night. Pompadour guy immediately made a call to his superior, confirming the first contact with the MC was a success. He realized the kid is sharp as a tack and definitely knows he's being scouted by the elite. When he got home, his mom was stunned by the massive delivery of premium beef. Gustavo just said it was a bonus for being a model employee. After surviving probation, our boy leveled up to a rank 3 employee. Hello, pay raise and top secret clearance. His mom is still nagging him for a grandkid, while Gustavo moved into a place closer to the office. But the weirdest part of his new promotion? His team literally has zero work to do. Lee casually mentioned he was heading out for another meeting, likely a nap. Gustavo asked him why their legendary boss has no performance data, and she said it's hard to grade someone who does nothing. Our boy argued they've been busy lately, but she explained they only play the supporting cast, so other teams steal the glory and the grades. He finally realized the truth. The higher-ups hate Lee so much they've basically ghosted Team 3 from all major missions. The only one actually breaking a sweat is Panda, who's basically the company's unofficial errand boy for every other team. Gustavo offered to share the load, but Panda was already one with the grind. Our MC hates, twiddling his thumbs, but Panda assured him that they do clutch work when it matters. Every so often, the team leader brings home a mission that actually shakes the world. The group chat chimed. Time for a team-building dinner. Panda led the way to a mysterious building. The crew asked if this was his actual house. But Panda laughed. This was the external war room, affectionately known as Panda's house. They dimmed the lights and fired up the projector to get down to business. Lee's voice turned serious as he commanded the room's attention. A game-changing discovery was made inside a white portal, the ambient stone. It's a natural battery for aura, the raw energy that fuels every psychic power. It's the ultimate catalyst, and the lab geeks think it's the key to infinite clean energy. But not all rocks are created equal. Their power levels vary wildly. The best they found so far are A-rank, pure powerhouses. To put it in perspective, a tiny D-rank stone could power a flight halfway around the world. An A-rank stone? That's enough juice to level a skyscraper or erase an S-rank transformer. And the kicker? At least 50 of these high-tier A-rank stones have already been dug up. The Psychic Syndicates got their hands on them first, but the secret is finally out. Possessing these stones is now a matter of national security. Bay Communications has been hired to guard the shipment, and they're getting paid in stones, which is exactly why Team 3 is finally getting off the bench. Lee, he's about to break down the mission's core intel for you, including every gritty, classified detail of this entire operation. The team was left speechless by the scale of the briefing. Lee turned to Panda, asking if the rookie could truly stomach a job this big, and the big guy had to pause and weigh the risks. In the end, he gave a nod of confidence, putting his faith in the kid's growth. So, it's a done deal. The plan is officially set in stone. But then our MC chimed in, asking why they had to meet in such a top-secret bunker just for this. The unhinged boss just smirked and said it's because they're finally doing some real work for once. Those words set a fire under our hero, pushing his motivation through the roof. That next ambient stone? It's basically already in their pockets. Fast forward 2 days, and the crew was already deployed deep in the field, in a high-security no-go zone packed with elite guards. Out of nowhere, a mysterious figure managed to rip right through the perimeter, leaving the regular soldiers in a state of pure panic. Tailing right behind Crazy Boss, our protagonist reminded everyone that this is a make-or-break moment for the Immortals. The target is running for his life, desperate to find an exit, but our hero and his elite partner are closing the distance at terrifying speed to finish the job. But just as they were about to pounce, the target vanished in a thin air. The regular troops saw the crazy look in their eyes and screamed for them to fall back. Ignoring the warnings, our protagonist steeled his resolve, ready to dive headfirst into the portal to secure his prize. Hey folks, did you enjoy this insane recap? I was totally hooked. If you're dying to see what happens next, smash that subscribe button and drop a like to support the channel. Catch you in the next chapter, everyone.